Get these people out of my cabin. They do not belong in first class. What happens when a quiet anniversary celebration turns into a humiliating public spectacle? For Dr. Vanessa Bennett and her husband, Michael. Their $18,000 first-class tickets on Meridian Airways were supposed to be the beginning of a well-deserved celebration. Instead, they were met with suspicious glances, whispered comments, and outright contempt from a crew that could not believe they belonged. The flight attendants' whispered words were crystal clear. They cannot be real first class. But the crew made a fatal mistake. They did not just harass any passenger. They harassed a federal officer with the authority to ground their entire operation. And when Michael Bennett finally stood and flashed his badge, he did not just silence the cabin. He brought an entire airline to its knees. The events that unfolded on Meridian Airways Flight 735 would reverberate through boardrooms, regulatory agencies, and social media feeds around the world. But before we get into what happened next, let me ask you, have you ever been in a situation where someone decided you did not belong, simply based on how you look? This is a story about dignity in the face of disrespect, about power that does not announce itself, and about what happens when those who enforce the rules encounter those who think they are above them. The polished marble floor of Meridian Airways Platinum Lounge at JFK International Airport reflected the crisp morning light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. Dr. Vanessa Bennett took a slow sip of her green tea, allowing herself a rare moment of stillness before their transatlantic journey. At 48, Vanessa moved through the world with the precision she brought to her operating room. Today, her navy blue Armani pantsuit was impeccable, her natural hair styled in a sophisticated updo, and her demeanor composed. As one of the few black female cardiothoracic surgeons in the country, she had learned long ago that excellence was her armor and composure her shield. 20 years of reconstructing damaged hearts had taught her to maintain perfect calm in the most critical moments. Beside her, Michael Bennett checked his watch, an understated Omega timepiece, a gift from Vanessa on their 10th anniversary. At 50, Michael was the embodiment of quiet confidence. 6'2" with close-cropped salt and pepper hair, he carried himself with the dignified bearing of someone who observed more than he spoke. His charcoal Tom Ford suit fit his athletic frame perfectly, not flashy, but quality that spoke for itself. Excited, he asked his deep voice a low rumble that had captivated Vanessa since they had met at Howard University 23 years ago. "More than I thought I would be," she admitted. "It has been too long since we have done something just for us." As a senior safety inspector with the Federal Aviation Administration's Air Carrier Division, Michael spent most of his career ensuring that airlines maintained the highest safety standards. His analytical mind, photographic memory for regulations, and unwavering integrity had earned him respect throughout the industry. Airlines typically scrambled to address any concerns he raised during inspections. Today, however, he was simply a husband celebrating 20 years of marriage to the brilliant woman beside him. Their destination, London, had been carefully chosen. 2 weeks of West End Theatre exclusive restaurant reservations and a side trip to the Cotswolds. After years of postponements due to surgical emergencies and regulatory crises, they had finally committed to disconnecting completely. Their tickets, 1A and 1B on Meridian's flagship Boeing 787 Dreamliner, represented not just luxury, but a declaration this time was sacred. "I switched my phone to vacation mode," Vanessa said, showing him the screen. "Dr. Patel has my cases for the next 2 weeks, and my assistant has strict instructions not to contact me unless someone is literally dying. The FAA will survive without me, too." Michael smiled, tucking away his government-issued phone. "I have been training Martin for this moment for 3 years." What neither of them said aloud was how much they needed this break. The past year had been particularly challenging. Vanessa had performed 212 surgeries, including a groundbreaking procedure that had garnered international attention. Michael had overseen a major investigation into maintenance violations that had required months of meticulous documentation and testimony. They had earned this moment. They had paid for this luxury, and they belonged in these seats just as much as anyone else. Neither of them could have predicted that proving this basic fact would soon become the focus of their journey. The first paper cut, as Vanessa called them, those tiny, stinging microaggressions that drew invisible blood, came at the lounge check-in desk. The attendant, a blonde woman with a practiced smile and a name tag reading, Heather Moore, looked up as they approached. "Membership cards, please?" she asked, her eyes scanning over them quickly. Michael placed their boarding passes and his platinum membership card on the counter. Bennett, first class to London. Heathrow Flight 735. Heather picked up the documents, glanced at them, then looked back at Michael and Vanessa with a flicker of surprise that she quickly masked. "Oh, wonderful. And which of our elite members are you accompanying today?" she asked with a bright smile. Vanessa felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the one that came whenever someone made assumptions about who she was or where she belonged. She had felt it in medical school when patients assumed she was the nurse. She had felt it at conferences when colleagues asked whose lab she worked in, unable to conceive that she might be the department head. "We are the elite members," Vanessa replied, her tone professional and warm, the same voice she used to put nervous residents at ease before a difficult procedure. "Bennett seats 1A and 1B. Heather's smile faltered momentarily. Her eyes darted from Vanessa's smooth brown skin to Michael's composed expression. "Right, of course, the Bennett party," she stammered. She had not said it, but the air crackled with her unspoken surprise. "You are first class. You are the platinum members." As they moved away from the desk toward the lounge's seating area, Michael placed his hand gently on the small of Vanessa's back. "Paper cut number 1, he murmured. "I am keeping score," she replied with a wry smile. They settled into plush leather chairs overlooking the tarmac. Vanessa watched massive planes taxi across the concrete, each one a marvel of engineering headed to destinations around the globe. "Remember my fellowship interview at Mass General?" she asked suddenly. Michael nodded. He remembered every slight his wife had endured. "The department chair asked me if I was in the right building," Vanessa continued. "I was wearing a $2,000 suit and carrying a briefcase my parents had given me for graduation. He still assumed I was lost." "What did you tell him?" Michael asked, though he knew the story well. "I told him I was exactly where I was supposed to be, and then I gave the best interview of my life." She smiled at the memory. 6 weeks later, he was introducing me as the most promising cardiothoracic fellow in the program's history. "You have always had that superpower," Michael said, turning other people's underestimation into fuel. "It gets exhausting, though," Vanessa admitted, more vulnerable than she usually allowed herself to be in public. 20 years at the top of my field, and people still look at me and see anything but what I actually am." Michael took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "You do not need to prove anything to anyone on this trip. We are not here to educate or elevate. We are here to celebrate us." Vanessa squeezed his hand in response. "You are right. I am just tired, Michael. It is our anniversary, and sometimes I wish we could just exist without having to constantly prove we belong." "We do not have to prove anything," Michael said, his voice a low, steady rumble. "We just have to be. Let them figure out the rest." Across the lounge, a black businessman in his 30s caught Vanessa's eye and gave a subtle nod of recognition. In that small gesture was an entire conversation. "I see you. I know what this is like. We belong here too." Vanessa nodded back the silent solidarity, momentarily easing the tension she felt. In her 20-year career, things had certainly improved, but these paper cuts, they still came, still stung, still accumulated into a larger wound that never fully healed. Besides, Michael added with a small smile, I have a feeling this trip is going to be memorable for reasons we have not even anticipated yet. He had no idea just how prophetic those words would prove to be. Boarding for Meridian Airways Flight 735 to London Heathrow will now begin. We would like to invite our uniformed military personnel and families with small children to pre-board at this time. The announcement echoed through the gate area, crisp and professional. Michael and Vanessa gathered their carry-on items, a leather briefcase for him, a designer tote for her, and positioned themselves near the priority lane. Around them, the gate area hummed with the particular energy of an international departure, excited tourists, blasé business travelers, and harried families, all converging toward a single point. We now invite our first-class passengers, as well as our Platinum Elite and Diamond members, to board through the priority lane. They moved forward, joining the small stream of passengers entering the jetway. Ahead of them, an older white couple in designer casual wear was greeted warmly by the gate agent. Mr. and Mrs. Hoffman, welcome. Enjoy your flight to London. When Michael and Vanessa reached the podium, the gate agent, a woman in her 50s with a tight blonde bun and a nameplate reading Sandra Peters, took their boarding passes with considerably less enthusiasm. She scanned Vanessa's pass first. The machine beeped green. She scanned Michael's next with the same result. Sandra's eyes narrowed slightly as she looked at her screen, then back at them. This is first class, she said, her voice carrying a note of challenge as if they might have wandered into the wrong lane. Yes, we know, Michael replied evenly. Sandra pressed her acrylic nail against her screen. These are full-fare tickets, she emphasized. Not upgrades, not companion passes. That is correct, Vanessa said, stepping slightly forward. Is there a problem with your system? We are in 1A and 1B. Sandra's lips pursed. The implication hung in the air. She was fishing for an explanation that would make sense of what she was seeing. Some reason why these two black professionals could be flying in the most expensive seats on the aircraft. Perhaps they were famous athletes or musicians, categories that her mind could accept. No problem, she finally said, tearing the stubs and handing them back. It is just unusual. As they moved past the gate desk, Vanessa felt Sandra's gaze follow them down the jetway. The weight of that stare was familiar, the look of someone trying to reconcile their presence with deeply held assumptions about where black people belonged. Unusual, Vanessa whispered to Michael as they walked. Her vocabulary is her problem, not ours, Michael replied calmly. Behind them, another passenger had overheard the exchange. Tayshawn Monroe, a young black tech entrepreneur, shook his head in weary recognition. Happens every time, he said quietly as he fell into step beside them. I am in business class, and I bet you anything she is going to check my boarding pass twice. Where are you headed? Michael asked. Connecting through to Dubai. Tayshawn replied. Startup conference. You anniversary trip. Vanessa smiled. 20 years. Tayshawn grinned. Congratulations. That is amazing. Well, enjoy yourselves. Do not let them steal your joy. With a friendly nod, he dropped back as they continued down the jetway. As they approached the aircraft door, the cool air of the climate-controlled cabin spilled out to greet them. Michael noted the registration number on the gleaming Boeing 7879 Dreamliner, one of Meridian's newest aircraft, barely 18 months in service. Its composite structure and advanced avionics made it one of the most sophisticated passenger planes flying. Normally, he would have appreciated the engineering marvel, but today he was simply a passenger. What Michael and Vanessa did not see was the look that passed between Sandra at the gate and Victoria Newman, the purser who greeted them at the door. It was a look of shared conspiracy, a silent knowing and utterly venomous get a load of these two. The first-class cabin on Meridian's 787 Dreamliner was a sanctuary of understated luxury, 8 private suites in a 1-2-1 configuration, each featuring a fully flat bed, 24-inch entertainment screen, and personal minibar. The palette was muted charcoal and silver with accents of the airline's signature teal. Ambient lighting mimicked the natural circadian rhythm, currently set to a gentle morning glow. Michael and Vanessa slipped their bags into the spacious overhead bins and settled into 1A and 1B, the 2 prime suites at the very front left of the aircraft offering both window and aisle access. The suites were angled toward each other with a divider that could be lowered for couples traveling together. Michael lowered it now, creating a shared space between them. The seats were upholstered in soft dove-gray leather, each with its own ottoman and side table. "This is nice," Vanessa said, running her hand appreciatively over the control panel that would transform her seat into a fully flat bed later in the flight. "Worth the splurge." Michael agreed, though they both knew it was not about the luxury itself but what it represented. Time together, uninterrupted, surrounded by comfort, rather than the demands of their high-pressure careers. The purser Victoria Newman appeared moments later. She was tall, with a severe blonde bob, and a nameplate that proudly declared her position as in-flight service director. She moved with an air of absolute authority, but her smile was tight and practiced, never quite reaching her eyes. She stopped first at suites 1C and 1D, where Richard and Elizabeth Hoffman, the older white couple from the gate, were settling in. "Mr. and Mrs. Hoffman, a very warm welcome aboard." Victoria gushed, her voice rising a full octave in warmth. "Can I get you a pre-departure glass of our Laurent Perrier Grand Siècle, or perhaps a mimosa to start your journey?" "Oh, champagne sounds lovely, dear," Elizabeth Hoffman said, removing her designer sunglasses. Victoria beamed and turned her attention to Michael and Vanessa. The transformation was immediate and striking. The smile vanished, replaced by a cool procedural mask. "Mr. and Mrs. Bennett, welcome aboard." She did not offer them champagne. "The main cabin door will be closing in approximately 20 minutes. Please ensure your personal items are properly stowed for departure." She did not wait for a reply. She simply turned on her heel and disappeared into the forward galley. Vanessa and Michael exchanged glances. The contrast in treatment was so blatant, so textbook, it was almost a caricature. "Well," Vanessa said, unbuckling her seatbelt to retrieve her own bottle of water from her tote, "it seems the champagne only flows in certain directions." "I am sure it was just an oversight," Michael said, though neither of them believed it. "I do not need her champagne anyway." "It is not about the champagne," Vanessa replied quietly. "It is about what it represents." He nodded, understanding completely. It was not about the drink itself. It was about being seen as deserving of the same courtesies automatically extended to other passengers in the same cabin. It was about belonging. As more first-class passengers boarded, Michael observed that Victoria greeted each white passenger with enthusiastic warmth, offering pre-departure beverages and hanging jackets. None of them received the curt, businesslike treatment she had shown to him and Vanessa. A younger flight attendant, Luis Morales, zipped by. He was in his mid-20s, all bright-eyed ambition, clearly eager to please his supervisor. He topped off Elizabeth Hoffman's champagne, then rushed to the galley. The galley was directly in front of Michael's seat, separated by a thin bulkhead and a curtain which Luis left slightly ajar. It was from this gap that the voices came, whispers, but in the quiet pre-departure cabin they were as clear as a shout. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Meridian Airways Flight 735 with non-stop service to London Heathrow. My name is Victoria Newman, and I will be your in-flight service director today." Victoria's announcement voice was smooth and professional, betraying none of the disdain she had shown to certain passengers moments earlier. The Boeing 787 was now fully boarded, the first-class cabin occupied by its 8 privileged travelers. The main cabin door had been closed, and the safety demonstration was about to begin. In 1A and 1B, Michael and Vanessa Bennett settled into their suites, each absorbed in their own pre-flight rituals. Vanessa had taken out a medical journal article she had been meaning to read while Michael reviewed their London itinerary, confirming their hotel car would be waiting at Heathrow. Victoria swept through the first-class cabin again, this time with Luis Morales trailing behind her. She stopped at 1C and 1D where the Hoffmans were comfortably ensconced. "Mr. and Mrs. Hoffman, would you care for a refill before takeoff?" Victoria asked, gesturing to their champagne flutes. "That would be lovely," Richard Hoffman replied. He was in his late 60s, silver-haired and tan with the easy confidence of old money. His cashmere sweater probably cost more than some people's monthly rent. "And can I get you a hot towel? Or perhaps some warm nuts to enjoy with your champagne?" Victoria continued her service for the Hoffmans, extending far beyond the basic courtesies. "The nuts would be wonderful." Elizabeth Hoffman smiled. "And do you have those lovely pajamas for the overnight portion? We had them last time on our flight to Tokyo." "Of course, Mrs. Hoffman. I will prepare the medium size for you, and large for Mr. Hoffman, just as you had on your previous flight," Victoria assured them, demonstrating an impressive memory for their preferences. Luis stood nearby watching Victoria's exemplary service to the Hoffmans, clearly taking mental notes on how to treat VIP passengers. Then Victoria turned and swept past 1A and 1B without stopping. "Luis," she called over her shoulder, "please check if 1A and 1B need anything before takeoff." The directive was clear. The Bennetts were Luis's responsibility, not hers. Luis approached with a nervous smile. "Can I get you anything before takeoff?" "Water juice?" he asked. "Is champagne not available for us?" Vanessa asked pointedly, having just witnessed Victoria's enthusiastic offering to the Hoffmans. Luis flushed slightly. "Of course I am sorry. Would you like champagne?" "Yes, please," Michael said. "2 glasses of the Laurent Perrier, if that is what you are serving today." Luis nodded and hurried away. From the corner of his eye, Michael saw Victoria intercept Luis in the galley, saying something in a low voice. Luis nodded repeatedly, then reached for the champagne bottle. Not the Laurent Perrier served to the Hoffmans, but a different, less premium bottle. A passenger from 2A, a woman in her 40s with stylish glasses and a professional camera bag, had been observing the interactions carefully. Alexandra Alex Williams was a travel blogger with over 500,000 followers across her social platforms. She specialized in luxury travel experiences, and something about the service disparity had caught her trained eye. Luis returned with 2 glasses of champagne that looked noticeably different from what the Hoffmans were enjoying. "Here you are," he said, placing the glasses on their side tables. "The, house champagne. I believe we requested the Laurent Perrier," Michael said quietly. "The same being served to other first-class passengers." Luis looked trapped, glancing over his shoulder toward the galley where Victoria was watching. "I will check if we have enough," he said, clearly uncomfortable. In the background, Victoria continued her attentive service to the passengers in 2C and 2D, a white middle-aged couple who were also receiving the premium champagne without having to ask specifically. When Luis disappeared into the galley again, Alexandra Williams leaned forward from her seat. "Excuse me," she said in a low voice. I could not help noticing the difference in service. "I am a travel blogger documenting the flight experience. Would you mind if I make a note of this? Discrepancy." Before Vanessa could respond, a passenger across the aisle spoke up. "They probably got upgraded," said James Whitfield from 1D, just loudly enough to be heard. He was a stocky man in his early 60s with thinning hair and an expensive watch that he seemed determined to display by constantly checking the time. That is usually why they serve the different champagne. Premium for full-fare house for upgrades. The implication was clear. "Actually," Vanessa said calmly, "we purchased these tickets 11 months ago. Full fare first class." Whitfield made a non-committal sound and turned away clearly, not believing her. Victoria emerged from the galley with Louise, who was now carrying 2 fresh glasses, this time of the Laurent Perrier. "My apologies for the confusion," Louise said, genuinely contrite as he replaced their glasses. "This is the correct champagne for first class." Victoria hovered nearby, her smile tight. "We need to prepare for departure now," she said to Louise. "Make sure all electronic devices are in airplane mode," she added, looking pointedly at Vanessa's tablet. As they moved away, Michael heard Victoria whisper to Louise check their tickets during the flight. "I want to verify their boarding passes." A warm hand touched Michael's arm. It was Vanessa, who had also overheard. Her eyes conveyed a clear message. "I heard that too. What are we going to do?" Michael covered her hand with his own. "Let us document everything," he murmured. "Every interaction, every discrepancy. I want to see just how far this goes." Across the aisle, Richard Hoffman was telling Elizabeth about his latest golf trip, completely oblivious to the situation unfolding around them. In 2B, a businessman was already asleep with an eye mask on. But Alexandra Williams was watching everything, her journalist's instincts clearly activated. Louise came by one more time now with hot towels. He offered them to Michael and Vanessa with a subtle apologetic look, clearly trying to provide proper service despite Victoria's influence. "Thank you, Louise," Vanessa said warmly, using his name deliberately. "We appreciate your attention." The young man nodded, a flicker of relief crossing his face. In that small exchange was a recognition Louise was not the problem. He was caught in Victoria's orbit, following her lead out of inexperience or job preservation. As the safety demonstration began, Michael observed Victoria positioned near the Hoffmans, providing them with personal commentary on the features of the first-class suites. She made no such effort for the Bennetts. The first paper cut had just become a deeper wound, and they had not even left the ground yet. The smooth acceleration of the Boeing 787 pressed Michael and Vanessa into their seats as the aircraft thundered down JFK's runway 31L. Within moments, the massive plane broke free of gravity, its nose tilting skyward as Manhattan's iconic skyline slipped away beneath them. Under normal circumstances, this would be the moment when Michael and Vanessa would clink glasses, officially beginning their anniversary celebration. Instead, they exchanged knowing glances silently, acknowledging that this flight had already become something very different from what they had anticipated. The first hour passed relatively smoothly as the aircraft climbed to its cruising altitude of 38,000 feet over the Atlantic. The seatbelt sign was turned off, and the cabin crew began their in-flight service preparations. Louise appeared with linen tablecloths, laying them carefully over each passenger's extended table. He started with the Hoffmans in 1C and 1D, then moved to James Whitfield in 1E before finally reaching the Bennetts. "Would you like to dine together?" he asked, gesturing to the adjustable divider between their suites that could be fully lowered for couples. "Yes, that would be nice," Vanessa replied. "Thank you, Louise." The young flight attendant nodded, seeming genuinely pleased to be addressed by name. As he arranged their tables, Victoria appeared with the wine list and menu for the first-class cabin. She presented them first to the Hoffmans with detailed descriptions of each selection, then to Whitfield and the passengers in row 2. When she finally reached Michael and Vanessa, she simply handed them the menus without comment and quickly moved on. "The salmon with dill cream sauce is particularly good on this route," they overheard her telling the Hoffmans moments later. "And we have a wonderful Pouligny Montrachet that pairs beautifully with it." No such recommendations were offered to the Bennetts. "Did you notice that everyone else got personalized recommendations?" Vanessa whispered to Michael. "It is like she is going out of her way to provide different levels of service." Michael nodded, his expression neutral, but his mind cataloging each discrepancy with the precision of a federal investigator. "I am keeping track," he assured her. When Louise came to take their order, he seemed nervous, glancing repeatedly toward the galley where Victoria was watching. "I will have the beef tenderloin," Michael said. "And I will try the salmon," Vanessa added. Louise wrote down their selections. And for wine, the Pouligny Montrachet sounds lovely, Vanessa said with a pointed smile. The one that pairs so beautifully with the salmon. Luis nodded, a flicker of understanding crossing his features. Excellent choice. When he left, Victoria intercepted him in the galley. Though their conversation was too quiet to overhear, her body language was unmistakable. She was questioning his interactions with the Bennetts. The next microaggression came when Victoria herself delivered the wine to each suite. For the other first-class passengers, she presented the bottle showing the label before pouring. She offered tastes for approval and provided commentary on the vineyard and vintage. When she reached Michael and Vanessa, she set down their glasses without presentation, the bottle nowhere in sight. "Excuse me," Michael said politely. "May I see the bottle, please?" Victoria's smile tightened. "Of course," she said, though her tone suggested this was an unusual request. She retreated to the galley and returned with the bottle, holding it at an angle that made it difficult for Michael to read the label. "Is there a problem?" she asked. "No problem," Michael replied evenly. "I just like to see what I am drinking." Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly. "Of course. Some of our more experienced travelers appreciate that." The emphasis on experienced carried a clear implication that she did not consider them among that group. As Victoria walked away, Alexandra Williams from 2A caught Vanessa's eye and raised an eyebrow in silent communication. She had clearly noticed the difference in service. The meal service continued with similar disparities. The Hoffmans and Whitfield received their courses with elaborate presentation and frequent check-ins. Victoria personally ground fresh pepper for them and offered bread refills multiple times. In contrast, the Bennett's meals were delivered with minimal interaction, and Victoria seemed to deliberately avoid their section, leaving Luis to handle their requests. When Vanessa asked for a bread refill, Victoria's response was telling. "We typically limit bread service to 1 roll per passenger in first class," she said. "It helps us maintain adequate supplies for the entire cabin." Yet just minutes earlier, she had offered a 3rd roll to Elizabeth Hoffman without prompting. The microaggressions continued to accumulate. When Michael pressed his call button to request a glass of water, it remained unanswered for 15 minutes, while calls from the Hoffmans and Whitfield received immediate attention. When Vanessa asked about the amenity kits that had been distributed to other first-class passengers, but not to them, Victoria claimed they were just about to distribute those, though they had been given to others over an hour earlier. When Michael inquired about the advertised pajamas for the overnight portion of the flight, Victoria informed him that they were only available upon request, despite having proactively offered them to the Hoffmans. Each incident alone might have been dismissed as a service oversight. Together they formed an unmistakable pattern. During a quiet moment, when Victoria was in the galley, Luis approached with their amenity kits and pajamas. "I am sorry about this," he whispered, barely audible. "This is not right." "It is not your fault," Vanessa assured him. "But why is she doing this?" Luis glanced over his shoulder. "She has been with the airline for 20 years. She has certain ideas about who belongs in first class." He looked deeply uncomfortable. "I should not be saying this. You are doing the right thing," Michael said quietly. "Has she done this before?" Before Luis could answer, Victoria's sharp voice cut through the cabin. "Luis, I need you in the galley immediately." The young man straightened up, his momentary courage evaporating. Right away he called back, hurrying away. From across the aisle, James Whitfield had been observing the exchanges with growing irritation. As a regular first-class passenger, he clearly viewed the cabin as his domain and the Bennetts as interlopers. "You know," he said, leaning slightly toward Michael, "if you are not happy with the service, perhaps business class might be more suitable next time." The implication was unmistakable. "I am quite comfortable in first class." "Thank you." Michael replied with deliberate calm. "In fact, I have flown in these seats many times." Whitfield made a dismissive noise. "Well, some of us are here every week. We are used to a certain standard, you understand. The crew knows what we expect." "And what standard would that be?" "Exactly?" Vanessa asked, her tone pleasant but her eyes sharp. Whitfield seemed taken aback by the direct question. "Well, you know. Professionalism. Attention to detail. A certain atmosphere." "And you do not think we contribute to that atmosphere?" Vanessa pressed. Whitfield shifted uncomfortably. "I am simply saying that regular passengers develop a rapport with the crew. It is nothing personal." "It feels very personal from where I am sitting," Vanessa replied. Whitfield's face reddened slightly. He turned away, muttering something under his breath that sounded suspiciously like playing the race card. Michael placed a restraining hand on Vanessa's arm as she opened her mouth to respond. "Not worth it," he murmured. "We are documenting everything." In 2A, Alexandra Williams had been surreptitiously taking notes on her phone. As a travel blogger specializing in premium cabin reviews, she had flown hundreds of first-class segments and had never witnessed such blatant service discrimination. As the meal service concluded, Victoria returned to collect the trays. She lingered at the Hoffmans' tables, chatting amicably about their London plans. She offered them coffee, digestives, and chocolates. When she reached the Bennetts, her demeanor changed completely. She efficiently cleared their tables without a word, offering no post-meal refreshments. "Excuse me," Michael said. "We would like coffee, please. And could we see the selection of digestives?" Victoria's smile never reached her eyes. "Of course. Luis will be right with you with coffee. We are a bit limited on after-dinner drinks at the moment." As she walked away, Michael and Vanessa exchanged glances. The pattern was unmistakable and increasingly difficult to ignore. "Should we say something?" Vanessa whispered. "Not yet," Michael replied. "I want to see how far this goes. But I promise you, Vanessa, this will not go unaddressed." The cabin lights dimmed as the aircraft continued eastward over the Atlantic. Most passengers prepared for sleep on the overnight flight. But for Michael and Vanessa Bennett, what should have been the beginning of a joyful celebration had transformed into something far more troubling, a master class in discrimination at 38,000 feet. 3 hours into the flight, the cabin was bathed in the soft blue glow of the Dreamliner's mood lighting. Most passengers had reclined their suites into the bed position, taking advantage of the lie-flat seats to get some rest before landing in London. Richard and Elizabeth Hoffman were both asleep, eye masks in place and breathing deeply. James Whitfield had consumed 3 scotches and was now snoring loudly enough to be heard over the ambient engine noise. Michael Bennett, however, remained awake. Years of FAA investigations had trained him to notice details that others missed, and something about this flight felt increasingly wrong. Next to him, Vanessa had drifted into a light sleep, her reading glasses still perched on the edge of her nose, medical journal open on her lap. The forward galley was mostly dark, with just enough light for the crew to navigate. Victoria and Luis were there, along with another flight attendant Michael had not seen before. Daniela Rodriguez, according to her name tag. They were conducting the mid-flight inventory check, counting meals and beverages for the arrival service. The galley curtain was partially open and sound carried clearly in the quiet cabin. Michael was not trying to eavesdrop, but Victoria's voice, though hushed, was perfectly audible from his suite. "I just do not get it," Victoria's sharp voice hissed. Sandra at the gate said they were full fare. "Look at them. They are probably using some kind of credit card scam. Or maybe they are those influencers who try to get everything for free." "They do not look like influencers," Luis's reedy voice replied, followed by a nervous chuckle. "He is dressed like a professor or something. And she thinks she is so entitled," Victoria continued, asking to see the wine bottle, requesting seconds on bread. "These people always want to squeeze every penny of value when they end up in first by mistake." Michael's hand tightened on his armrest. These people. The words hit like a physical blow. Maybe they just saved up for a special trip, Daniela suggested quietly. The woman mentioned it is their anniversary. Please, Victoria scoffed. Do you know what those seats cost? Over $9,000 each. They do not fit the profile. Then came the line that made Michael's blood run cold. Trust me, Victoria whispered, her voice laced with venom. They cannot be real first class. Real first class is, well, it is like the Hoffmans, people who belong here. These two, they are just passing through. Probably won some contest or sued somebody. Just make sure you double-check everything they ask for. I want an eye on them. Michael's jaw clenched. He glanced over at Vanessa and was startled to find her eyes open, staring at the ceiling. She had heard it too. Her expression was composed, but he knew his wife well enough to see the hurt beneath her professional mask. Did you verify their boarding passes like I asked? Victoria continued. Yes, Luis admitted reluctantly. They are legitimate. Full fare tickets purchased 11 months ago. Well, something is not right, Victoria insisted. Nobody pays that kind of money for seats they do not normally sit in. I have been flying this route for 15 years. I know my passengers. Michael watched as Vanessa carefully closed her medical journal and removed her glasses, folding them deliberately. Her movements were precise, controlled, the same way she operated when faced with a crisis in surgery. She was containing her emotions, compartmentalizing just as she did when a patient's heart failed under her hands. I am going to request a different flight attendant for our section, Vanessa whispered. Wait, Michael replied softly, placing his hand over hers. Let us think strategically. If we complain now, she will just deny everything and make the rest of the flight even more uncomfortable. In the galley, the conversation continued. We should at least offer them the proper service, Daniela was saying, discomfort evident in her voice. It is company policy to... I know company policy better than you do. Victoria cut her off. I have been flying since you were in elementary school, and I know trouble when I see it. These two are going to write a complaint no matter what we do trying to get free miles or an upgrade next time. I have seen it 100 times. But what if they are just regular customers? Luis persisted, showing unexpected backbone. The man seems to know a lot about aviation. He asked about the specific engine model when I served his meal. That is exactly what I mean, Victoria replied. They always try too hard. Real first-class passengers do not need to show off how much they know. In 2A, Alexandra Williams had also overheard the conversation. The travel blogger caught Michael's eye and raised her phone, discreetly mouthing the words, I am recording this. Michael gave her a subtle nod of appreciation. Thomas Jenkins, a tech executive seated in 2C who had been quietly observing the situation, now leaned forward. Excuse me, he said in a low voice. I could not help overhearing. This is completely unprofessional behavior from that flight attendant. Would you like me to say something? I am a Diamond member with over 2 million miles on Meridian. Michael considered the offer. Thomas Jenkins was a white man in his early 40s, dressed in casual luxury. Exactly the type Victoria seemed to respect. His intervention might change the dynamic, but it would also take away their opportunity to document the full extent of the discrimination. Thank you, but not just yet, Michael replied. We are handling it our way. I understand, Thomas nodded. But if you change your mind, I am happy to back you up. This is not right. As the galley conversation ended, Victoria emerged with fresh bottled water, distributing it to the passengers in row 2, then to Whitfield and the Hoffmans. She deliberately bypassed 1A and 1B, leaving Luis to awkwardly deliver water to the Bennetts several minutes later. I am sorry, Luis whispered as he placed the bottles on their side tables. I do not agree with how you are being treated. It is not your fault, Vanessa assured him. But you should know that this is not just rude service. It is discrimination, and it is being documented. Luis's eyes widened slightly. He glanced over his shoulder toward the galley, then back at the Bennetts. "I have only been flying for 6 months," he said quietly. "Victoria is my supervisor. She does my performance reviews." "I understand," Michael said. "You are in a difficult position." Luis hesitated, then lowered his voice further. "She has done this before. Not usually this obvious, but there is a pattern. Some of us have noticed." "Thank you for telling us," Michael replied. "That information is helpful." As Luis retreated to the galley, Vanessa turned to Michael, her expression troubled. "What are we going to do?" she asked. "This is supposed to be our celebration, not another battlefield." Michael took her hand, his touch steady and reassuring. "First, we document everything: times, statements, disparities in service. Second, we continue to respond with professionalism. And third, his expression hardened slightly. When the time is right, we address it officially. "I am so tired of having to be the better person," Vanessa said, a rare moment of vulnerability from a woman who had spent her career proving herself in predominantly white male spaces. "I know," Michael replied, "but we have something they do not expect." "What is that knowledge?" "Authority. And the ability to ensure that this never happens to anyone else on this airline." Vanessa studied her husband's face, recognizing the quiet determination she had seen many times before. Michael Bennett was not a man who sought confrontation, but neither was he someone who let injustice pass unchallenged. "We are still going to enjoy our anniversary," he promised, squeezing her hand. "This is just a detour, not a destination." Vanessa nodded, drawing strength from his certainty. As a cardiothoracic surgeon, she was accustomed to high-pressure situations with life-or-death stakes. This was different. Not a medical emergency, but a moral one. And just as she would never walk away from a patient in crisis, she would not let this discrimination go unaddressed. Outside their window, the vast Atlantic stretched beneath them, dark and endless under the moonlight. They were halfway to London, but the most significant part of their journey was yet to come. 5 hours into the flight, the first hints of dawn were beginning to lighten the eastern horizon. Most passengers remained asleep, their suites cocoon-like in the dim cabin. The air felt stale and dry, the peculiar atmosphere of a long-haul flight when night transitions to morning. Vanessa had managed to get a few hours of sleep, but Michael remained vigilant, documenting each interaction with the crew in the Notes app on his phone. The list had grown disturbingly long. Victoria emerged from the crew rest area looking fresh despite the overnight shift. She immediately began preparing for the breakfast service, organizing trays in the galley with crisp efficiency. Luis and Daniela joined her, receiving instructions in low voices. The breakfast service followed the now familiar pattern. Victoria personally served the Hoffmans, who had awakened and were adjusting their seats to the upright position. She offered them their choice of breakfast options, including items not listed on the menu. "We have some fresh berries that just came aboard in New York," she told Elizabeth Hoffman. "I know how much you enjoy them. I had the catering team prepare a special portion." The personalized attention continued as she moved to James Whitfield's suite and then to the passengers in row 2. When she reached Michael and Vanessa, her demeanor changed entirely. "Continental or hot breakfast?" she asked curtly. "What are the hot options?" Vanessa inquired. "They are listed on the menu," Victoria replied, making no effort to recite them as she had for other passengers. "I will have the eggs. Benedict, please," Vanessa said. "And I will take the frittata," Michael added. Victoria nodded and walked away without another word. Luis appeared minutes later with their beverages, orange juice and coffee for both. As he set down Michael's cup, his hand trembled slightly, causing a few drops to spill onto the tray table. "I am so sorry," he said quickly, reaching for a napkin. "It is fine, Luis," Michael assured him. "Accidents happen." Victoria, who had been watching from the galley, swooped in immediately. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, her tone suggesting she expected one. "Not at all," Michael replied calmly. "Just a small spill already cleaned up." Victoria's eyes narrowed as if searching for a reason to intervene. Finding none, she turned to Luis. "Remember your training," she said pointedly. "First-class service requires precision." The implication was clear. Luis was being reprimanded for providing friendly service to the Bennetts. As Victoria walked away, Luis whispered, "Your breakfast will be right out." When the meals arrived, the contrast was striking. The Hoffmans' plates were garnished with fresh herbs and arranged with artistic precision. Vanessa's Eggs Benedict, however, was carelessly assembled, the hollandaise sauce congealing and the English muffin barely toasted. Michael's frittata was similarly neglected, the presentation haphazard compared to the other first-class meals. "This is deliberate," Vanessa murmured, examining her plate. Michael nodded, taking a photo with his phone. "Evidence," he said quietly. In 2A, Alexandra Williams was doing the same, documenting the stark difference in presentation between the meals. The culminating incident occurred as the breakfast service concluded. Victoria was moving through the cabin with a pot of coffee, offering refills. She had just topped off Elizabeth Hoffman's cup when she turned too quickly, bumping into Vanessa, who had stood to visit the lavatory. The coffee splashed across Vanessa's silk blouse, the hot liquid creating an immediate dark stain across the expensive fabric. "Oh," Victoria exclaimed, her surprise appearing genuine, though her follow-up was telling. "You should be more careful. Passengers should remain seated during service." Vanessa gasped, more from the accusation than the heat. "I was simply standing to use the restroom," she said, reaching for napkins to blot the spreading stain. "The seatbelt sign is off, and I have every right to move about the cabin," she added, her professional composure beginning to crack. Michael was on his feet immediately, handing Vanessa more napkins while fixing Victoria with a steady gaze. "My wife needs club soda and salt for the stain," he said evenly. "And I believe an apology is in order." Victoria's expression hardened. "Accidents happen in flight," she said dismissively. "I will see if we have club soda." She walked away without apologizing, leaving Vanessa standing there, stained and humiliated. Luis rushed over with a bottle of club soda and a sympathetic expression. "I am so sorry, Dr. Bennett," he said, having noted her title from the passenger manifest. "Let me help you clean that." "Thank you, Luis." Vanessa said, her voice tight with controlled emotion. The commotion had awakened the remaining sleeping passengers, and now all eyes in the first-class cabin were on the unfolding scene. Alexandra Williams had captured the entire incident on video. Thomas Jenkins in 2C looked appalled. Even the Hoffmans seemed uncomfortable with Victoria's handling of the situation. Only James Whitfield appeared unmoved, making a show of checking his watch, as if the incident were merely an inconvenience to his schedule. "These things happen," he commented loudly enough for everyone to hear. "That is why I never wear anything valuable on flights." The implication that Vanessa's clothing was somehow inappropriate for first class was the final straw. Michael Bennett stood his 6'2" frame, commanding attention without raising his voice. "I would like to speak with the captain, please," he said to Victoria as she returned from the galley. Victoria's expression flickered between surprise and dismissal. "The captain is busy preparing for our arrival in London. If you have a complaint, you can submit it to customer service after we land." "This is not a matter for customer service," Michael replied, his voice calm but firm. "This is a matter of passenger rights and federal aviation regulations. I would like to speak with the captain now." Victoria's smile turned cold. "Sir, as I explained, the flight deck is occupied with arrival preparations. I am the highest authority in the cabin, and I have addressed the situation. Your wife stood up during service and caused a collision. Now please return to your seat. We are beginning our descent soon." Michael remained standing, his expression neutral, but his eyes intently focused on Victoria. "Are you refusing my request to speak with the captain?" he asked. I am prioritizing the safety of this flight, Victoria replied with exaggerated patience. Something you seem unwilling to respect. From across the aisle, James Whitfield interjected. Just sit down and let them do their jobs. Some of us have connections to make at Heathrow. Michael ignored him, keeping his attention on Victoria. For the record, I am formally requesting to speak with the captain about discriminatory treatment my wife and I have received throughout this flight. Victoria's face flushed. Discriminatory. That is a serious accusation, sir. I have been nothing but professional with all passengers. We have witnesses and documentation that suggest otherwise, Michael replied evenly. The tension in the cabin was palpable. Other passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing that this confrontation was escalating beyond a routine customer service issue. Victoria's voice took on an edge of authority. Sir, I need you to return to your seat immediately. If you continue to disrupt the cabin, I will have to report this as an incident of passenger non-compliance. It was a thinly veiled threat. Passenger non-compliance could result in law enforcement meeting the aircraft upon arrival. Michael remained unperturbed. I am not being non-compliant. I am making a reasonable request to speak with the captain regarding a legitimate concern. Victoria took a step closer, lowering her voice. Listen carefully. We land in less than 2 hours. If you want to file a complaint, you can do so at the service desk in London. But right now, you are becoming disruptive, and I will not hesitate to note that in my report. Behind Victoria, the cockpit door opened and Captain Andrew Palmer emerged to use the lavatory. In his late 50s, with silver hair and the confident bearing of a senior pilot, he immediately sensed the tension in the cabin. Everything all right out here, Victoria? He asked. Victoria straightened, smoothing her uniform. Everything is fine, Captain. Just a passenger with a spilled coffee making unnecessary demands. Captain Palmer looked from Victoria to Michael, then to Vanessa, who was still attempting to clean her blouse. What seems to be the issue, he asked directly. Before Michael could answer, Victoria interjected, They are upset about an accidental coffee spill, Captain. I have offered assistance, but they are being difficult. I have got it under control. Michael met the captain's gaze. That is not accurate, Captain. My wife and I have experienced consistent discriminatory treatment throughout this flight, culminating in this incident which was not acknowledged or properly addressed. Captain Palmer's expression remained neutral, though his eyes sharpened with interest. That is a serious allegation. Perhaps we should discuss this privately. Victoria's composure faltered slightly. Captain, we are preparing for arrival. This can be handled through normal customer service channels. The captain held up a hand to silence her. I will be the judge of that, Victoria. He turned back to Michael. Sir, if you would like to step into the galley with me for a moment, I would be happy to hear your concerns. As Michael moved to follow the captain, Victoria's voice took on a desperate edge. Captain, with all due respect, this is a cabin management issue. There is no need to involve the flight deck. Captain Palmer gave her a measured look. Thank you, Victoria. Please continue with arrival preparations. In the galley, Captain Palmer spoke in low tones. I apologize for any discomfort you and your wife have experienced. Can you tell me specifically what has happened? Michael began a concise factual summary of the events since boarding. As he spoke, the captain's expression grew increasingly concerned. These are serious allegations, he said when Michael finished. I assure you they will be thoroughly investigated. I appreciate that, Captain, Michael replied. But there is something else you should know. He reached into his inner jacket pocket and removed a small leather case. When he opened it, the FAA Senior Safety Inspector badge and credentials were unmistakable. Captain Palmer's expression changed immediately, recognition and concern flashing across his features. I am not here in an official capacity, Michael clarified. My wife and I are genuinely traveling to London for our anniversary. But what we have experienced on this flight constitutes a clear violation of 14 CFR Part 91.533 regarding cabin crew responsibilities and passenger rights. The captain straightened his entire demeanor, shifting from polite concern to professional alertness. "I understand, Inspector Bennett. I assure you this matter will be addressed immediately." From her position near the front of the cabin, Victoria watched the exchange with growing apprehension. She could not hear the conversation, but the captain's change in posture told her something significant had occurred. When Michael and Captain Palmer emerged from the galley, the atmosphere in the first-class cabin had changed. The power dynamic had shifted, though most passengers did not yet understand why. That was about to change. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Palmer speaking. We are approximately 90 minutes from our arrival at London Heathrow. We have been cleared for a direct approach, and weather conditions are favorable with light rain and temperature of 14 degrees Celsius." The captain's announcement came through the cabin speakers with professional clarity. Nothing in his tone suggested the tense conversation that had just occurred in the galley. "At this time, I would like to personally apologize for any service inconsistencies you may have experienced during our flight. Meridian Airways prides itself on equal respectful treatment of all passengers, and I have been made aware that we may have fallen short of that standard today." In the forward galley, Victoria froze a stack of customs forms in her hands. This was highly unusual. Captains rarely addressed service issues directly, especially over the public address system. "I will be speaking with our cabin crew about these concerns," Captain Palmer continued. "In the meantime, please do not hesitate to let any crew member know if you need assistance during our final hours of flight." The announcement concluded, leaving a buzz of speculative conversation in its wake. Passengers glanced at each other, then at the Bennetts putting together the pieces of what they had witnessed. Victoria emerged from the galley, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. She moved directly to Michael and Vanessa's suites, leaning in with a tight smile that did not reach her eyes. "I see you have escalated this situation unnecessarily," she said, her voice low but intense. "The captain is very busy with arrival preparations. Your complaint could have been handled through proper channels." Michael met her gaze evenly. "The proper channel for addressing discriminatory treatment is immediate notification to the pilot in command. I am sure you are familiar with federal aviation regulations regarding passenger rights." Victoria's smile hardened. "Sir, I have been flying for over 20 years. I know my job, and I resent the implication that I have discriminated against anyone." "It is not an implication," Vanessa said, joining the conversation. "It is a documented fact. You have provided demonstrably different service to us compared to other passengers in the same cabin." "That is your perception," Victoria countered. "And perception is not reality. Actually, Alexandra Williams interjected from 2A. I have documented the differences in service. I am a travel journalist, and I have reviewed over 200 first-class flights. The disparity in how you have treated the Bennetts compared to other passengers is unmistakable." Victoria's head snapped toward Alexandra, suddenly realizing that her actions had been observed and recorded by a professional critic. Her composure faltered momentarily before she regained control. "I do not know what you think you have seen," she said to Alexandra, "but I can assure you that all passengers receive equal treatment in my cabin." "That is demonstrably false," Thomas Jenkins added from 2C. "I have witnessed the difference myself. As a Diamond member with over 2 million miles on Meridian, I am familiar with your first-class service standards, and what I have observed today falls far short." Victoria's face reddened as she realized she was losing control of the narrative. Passengers she would typically respect and prioritize, a travel journalist and a Diamond member, were aligning against her. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, abandoning her professional demeanor. "You have no idea the challenges we face maintaining service standards with certain types of passengers." The phrase hung in the air, certain types of passengers, its implication unmistakable. And what type would that be exactly? Michael asked, his voice deadly calm. Victoria realized her mistake too late. She glanced around, noting that most of the first-class cabin was now watching the exchange. Even the Hoffmans, who had been the beneficiaries of her preferential treatment, looked uncomfortable. I simply meant inexperienced travelers who are not familiar with first-class protocols she attempted to recover. It has nothing to do with other factors. What protocols are those? Vanessa pressed. The protocol of not offering us champagne, the protocol of checking our tickets multiple times, the protocol of serving us different meals than everyone else. Victoria's professional mask slipped further. You people always make everything about race. I have provided perfectly adequate service to everyone in this cabin. You people, Michael repeated softly. The phrase echoed in the suddenly silent cabin. Realizing her critical error, Victoria attempted to backpedal. I meant passengers who are looking for special treatment. This has nothing to do with your race. Then why did you tell Luis that we cannot be real first class, and that real first class is like the Hoffmans? Michael asked. We both heard you say it. Victoria's eyes widened in shock. You were eavesdropping on private crew conversations when those conversations are about us and clearly audible from our seats. Yes, Vanessa replied. And apparently we were not the only ones who heard you. Alexandra Williams held up her phone. I recorded it, along with several other concerning statements you have made during this flight. Victoria's face drained of color as she realized the extent of her exposure. Her career, built over 2 decades, was potentially crumbling before her eyes. In that moment of panic, she made her final and most damaging mistake. You need to delete that recording immediately, she demanded, reaching for Alexandra's phone. It is against airline policy to record crew members without consent. Alexandra pulled her phone back. Actually, it is not. There is no expectation of privacy in a public cabin, especially when you are making discriminatory statements loud enough for multiple passengers to hear. Victoria turned back to the Bennetts, her professional pretense now completely abandoned. This is what you wanted all along, is not it? To create a scene to play the victim to get special treatment or compensation. What we wanted, Vanessa said with quiet dignity, was to celebrate our 20th anniversary with the first-class experience we paid for. The same experience given to every other passenger in this cabin. Well, you have certainly made sure that will not happen, Victoria snapped. Congratulations on ruining the flight for everyone. At that moment, Luis approached cautiously from the galley. Victoria, he said in a low voice, the captain is asking for you on the interphone. Victoria straightened her uniform, attempting to regain her composure. This is not over, she said to the Bennetts, before turning sharply and heading to the galley. In the tense silence that followed, James Whitfield from 1E decided to weigh in. Well, this is all very dramatic, he commented loudly. Some of us are just trying to enjoy a peaceful flight without all this activism. Michael turned to him calmly. Sir, requesting equal treatment is not activism. It is a basic right. Look, Whitfield said, leaning forward. You got what you wanted. You have embarrassed the flight attendant and involved the captain. Is not that enough? Do we all need to suffer through this spectacle? James, Elizabeth Hoffman, interjected unexpectedly. Perhaps we should stay out of this. From what I have observed, they have legitimate concerns. Whitfield looked betrayed by this lack of support. Oh, come on, Elizabeth. You know as well as I do that certain passengers are just looking for reasons to complain. They probably got upgraded and now expect royal treatment. Actually, Richard Hoffman said I believe they mentioned they paid full fare for their tickets, just as we did. The dynamic in the cabin was shifting. What Victoria had assumed would be natural alliances along racial lines were breaking down as other passengers recognized the fundamental unfairness of the situation. In the galley, Victoria's heated conversation with the captain was partially audible to those in the front row. Her defensive tone and increasingly desperate explanations suggested the call was not going well for her. Luis approached the Bennetts with fresh napkins and club soda for Vanessa's stained blouse. "I am so sorry about all of this," he said quietly. "This is not what Meridian stands for." "Thank you," Vanessa said warmly. "We do not hold you responsible for Victoria's actions." "Did you know Michael asked the young flight attendant about her pattern of behavior with certain passengers?" Luis looked torn between professional loyalty and personal integrity. "I have only been flying for 6 months," he said softly, "but I have noticed tendencies. Some of us newer crew members have discussed it, but she has been with the airline for so long and she has connections in management." Michael nodded understandingly. "Reporting discrimination is never easy, especially when it comes from someone in authority. The captain asked me to tell you that he will be speaking with you again before we land," Luis added. "He is taking this very seriously." In the galley, Victoria slammed down the interphone handset, her face a mask of fury and fear. She stormed back into the cabin, heading directly for the Bennetts. "I hope you are satisfied," she hissed. 22 years of exemplary service, and now I am being asked to document my actions for an internal review." "Your actions are what prompted this situation," Vanessa replied calmly. "Not our response to them. You have no idea the damage you have done," Victoria continued, her voice rising. "All because you could not handle a little less attention than you thought you deserved." Captain Palmer emerged from the cockpit again, his expression grave as he took in the scene. "Victoria," he said firmly, "I need you in the galley. Now. Captain, I am in the middle of now." He repeated his tone, leaving no room for argument. As Victoria reluctantly followed him to the galley, the first-class cabin erupted into hushed conversations. The drama was now impossible to ignore, and passengers were openly discussing what they had witnessed. Alexander Williams leaned forward from 2A. "I have documented everything she told the Bennetts. If you need a witness statement for any formal complaint, I am happy to provide one." "Thank you," Michael said sincerely. "That may be very helpful." In the galley, Captain Palmer's voice was now clearly audible to the front row. "This is unacceptable, Victoria. I have received reports from multiple passengers confirming discriminatory treatment." "They are exaggerating, Captain. This is about a spilled coffee and entitled passengers trying to—" Enough, the captain cut her off. "I have reviewed the documented incidents, and there is a clear pattern here. As pilot in command, I am removing you from cabin service duties for the remainder of this flight. Daniela will take over the first-class cabin. You will remain in the crew rest area until we land." "You cannot do that," Victoria protested. "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that your behavior constitutes a potential safety risk by creating a hostile environment for passengers in violation of federal regulations and company policy." "This is outrageous," Victoria sputtered. "I have never been treated like this in my entire career." "That is the problem," Captain Palmer replied grimly. "I suspect you have never been held accountable before. That changes today." The confrontation had reached its breaking point, and the power dynamics had shifted irrevocably. What Victoria had begun as a subtle exercise in discrimination had escalated into a career-defining moment of accountability, and Michael Bennett had yet to reveal the full extent of his authority and influence. The Dreamliner began its initial descent toward London Heathrow, the gentle banking of the aircraft tilting the horizon visible through the windows. The mood in the first-class cabin remained tense in the aftermath of Victoria's removal from service. Daniela Rodriguez had taken over providing attentive and equal service to all passengers with a professionalism that highlighted Victoria's failings. In the galley, Captain Palmer was engaged in a quiet conversation with Michael Bennett, their voices too low for other passengers to hear. The captain's expression was grave, his posture respectful as he listened to Michael's concerns. Vanessa observed the interaction from her suite, noting the subtle shift in the captain's demeanor, the increasing deference he showed as Michael spoke. She recognized the signs her husband was no longer speaking as a passenger, but as a federal official. After several minutes, Captain Palmer nodded decisively and returned to the cockpit. Michael made his way back to his seat, his expression unreadable. "What is happening?" Vanessa asked quietly. "The captain is filing an air safety report," Michael replied. "He is documenting the incident in official channels." "Will that be enough?" she asked, thinking of Victoria's 22 years with the airline and her apparent connections in management. "It is just the beginning," Michael assured her. In the row behind them, Alexandra Williams was updating her social media channels, her thumbs flying across her phone screen. "I hope you do not mind," she said, leaning forward. "I have mentioned this incident in my live trip report. No names, just the situation. The response has been overwhelming. People are sharing similar experiences on Meridian and other airlines." Michael nodded thoughtfully. Transparency is important. These issues persist because they remain hidden. James Whitfield, who had been silently fuming since his attempt to defend Victoria had backfired, suddenly spoke up. "This is ridiculous," he said loudly. "One flight attendant has a bad day and suddenly it is a federal case. You people always have to make everything so dramatic." The cabin fell silent at his outburst. Whitfield, emboldened by the attention, continued. 20 years ago, passengers understood their place. Now everyone thinks they are entitled to special treatment. So you did not get champagne offered the exact same way as someone else. Is that really worth destroying someone's career?" Michael turned to face him calmly. "Sir, this is not about champagne. It is about dignity and equal treatment under federal law." "Federal law?" Whitfield scoffed. "Next you will be threatening to sue the airline." "That is how it always goes, is not it." Vanessa's eyes flashed with anger, but her voice remained measured. "Mr. Whitfield, your comments suggest you believe we do not belong in these seats." May I ask why Whitfield shifted uncomfortably, aware that other passengers were watching? "I did not say that. I simply think this whole situation has been blown out of proportion." "The situation is exactly in proportion to the offense," Michael replied. "Discrimination in air transportation is not a minor inconvenience. It is a violation of federal law and basic human dignity." "Oh, please." Whitfield rolled his eyes. "Discrimination, always the same card." A tension headache was building behind Vanessa's eyes. After 20 years as one of the few black female cardiothoracic surgeons in the country, she was intimately familiar with this dismissive attitude. The implication that claims of discrimination were always exaggerated, always a card being played rather than a lived reality. "Mr. Whitfield," she said, her surgeon's precision evident in each carefully chosen word, "I have performed over 2,000 open-heart surgeries. I have held people's lives in my hands. I have published 37 peer-reviewed articles and pioneered 2 surgical techniques now taught in medical schools worldwide. My husband has overseen aviation safety for commercial carriers across 3 regions. We are both at the top of highly demanding fields. And yet, the moment we step outside our professional contexts, people like you and Victoria immediately assume we do not belong." Whitfield appeared taken aback by this recitation of credentials. I did not know." "You did not need to know." Vanessa continued. "That is the point. No passenger should have to present their resume to receive equal treatment." The cabin fell silent as her words resonated with everyone present. Even the Hoffmans were nodding in agreement. Luis appeared from the galley, approaching Michael hesitantly. "Sir, the captain asked me to inform you that we will be landing in approximately 30 minutes. He also wanted me to confirm that you will be met by Meridian's London station manager upon arrival." "Thank you, Luis," Michael replied. "There is something else," Luis added, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Victoria is demanding to know who you are. She is convinced you must be someone important for the captain to take your complaint so seriously." A small smile played at the corner of Michael's mouth. She will find out soon enough. As Luis returned to the galley, Whitfield's curiosity got the better of him. "So, who are you?" he asked bluntly. "Someone famous? A politician?" "I am a passenger who paid for a service and expected to receive it without discrimination," Michael replied evenly. "That should be enough." Whitfield's persistence was interrupted by an announcement from the flight deck. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Palmer. We are beginning our final approach into London Heathrow. At this time, please ensure your seats are in the upright position. Tray tables are stowed and all electronic devices are switched to airplane mode." The usual pre-landing routine began. Luis and Daniela moving through the cabin, checking seat belts and collecting last-minute items. The Hoffmans were engaged in quiet conversation, occasionally glancing toward the Bennetts with expressions of concern. Thomas Jenkins was typing rapidly on his phone, presumably sending last messages before landing. Alexandra Williams had her notebook out, jotting down final observations for her travel review. From the crew rest area, Victoria emerged briefly, her face tight with suppressed fury as she surveyed the cabin. Her gaze locked onto Michael and Vanessa, communicating unmistakable hostility before Daniela directed her back out of sight. "She still does not get it," Vanessa murmured. "She will," Michael replied with quiet certainty. As the aircraft descended through the cloud layer over London, rain streaking across the windows, the tension in the cabin seemed to build rather than dissipate. Everyone sensed that this story was not yet concluded, that the real confrontation was still to come. The landing gear deployed with a mechanical thunk, the sensation of deceleration pressing passengers into their seats as the massive aircraft aligned with Heathrow's runway 27L. The gentle bump of wheels touching down was followed by the roar of reverse thrust as the Dreamliner slowed on the wet tarmac. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to London Heathrow Airport, where the local time is 10:42 a.m. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened until the aircraft has come to a complete stop at the gate and the seatbelt sign has been turned off." As the aircraft taxied toward Terminal 5, Michael reached inside his jacket and removed a small leather case. He placed it on his side table, not opening it yet, but positioning it visibly. Vanessa recognized the gesture. Her husband was preparing for what came next. When the aircraft finally reached the gate and the seatbelt sign was turned off, Captain Palmer emerged from the cockpit. He was joined by a man in a crisp suit with a Meridian Airways executive badge, clearly the promised station manager who had boarded immediately upon arrival. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain addressed the first-class cabin due to a customer service incident during our flight. "We will be briefly delaying disembarkation from the first-class cabin. Our London station manager, Mr. Robert Collins, is here to address the situation. We apologize for any inconvenience and thank you for your patience." Victoria had been summoned from the crew rest area and now stood rigidly beside Luis and Daniela, her expression a mixture of defiance and apprehension. Robert Collins stepped forward. "Good morning. I understand there were some service issues during this flight that require immediate attention. Could the affected passengers please identify themselves?" Michael stood his full height and composed demeanor commanding the space without aggression. "My wife and I experienced discriminatory treatment throughout this flight," he said calmly. Collins nodded, his expression professionally concerned. "I apologize for your experience, sir. If you would be willing to provide details, we can address this immediately and ensure appropriate compensation for your inconvenience." Victoria interjected, unable to contain herself. "Mr. Collins, this is being blown completely out of proportion. There was a minor service discrepancy and an accidental beverage spill, nothing more." Collins glanced at Victoria with a warning look before turning back to Michael. "Sir, if you could describe what occurred?" "Before I do," Michael interrupted gently, "I should identify myself properly." He opened the leather case on his table, revealing a gleaming gold badge and official identification card. The federal seal was unmistakable, as was the title beneath it, Federal Aviation Administration, Senior Safety Inspector. The effect was immediate and electric. Victoria's face drained of color. Luis and Daniela exchanged alarmed glances. Robert Collins froze mid-sentence, suddenly realizing he was facing not just an upset passenger, but a federal authority with jurisdiction over airline operations. "My name is Michael Bennett," he continued in the same measured tone. "I am a Senior Safety Inspector with the FAA's Air Carrier Division. While I am traveling privately today with my wife to celebrate our anniversary, I cannot and will not ignore the violations of federal regulations that occurred on this flight." The cabin was absolutely silent. Even the ambient sounds of the aircraft seemed to have faded away. Every eye was fixed on the badge in Michael's hand, the physical manifestation of authority that Victoria had never imagined her target possessed. Under 14 CFR Part 91.533 and related statutes, airlines are prohibited from discriminating against passengers on the basis of race color, national origin, religion, sex, or ancestry. Michael continued, his voice taking on the formal cadence of his professional role. Additionally, Meridian Airways' own published service standards promise equal treatment to all passengers within the same class of service. Victoria found her voice, though it trembled slightly. "I did not discriminate against anyone. This is a misunderstanding. I have documented over 20 specific instances of disparate treatment during this 8-hour flight," Michael cut her off. "These have been corroborated by multiple witnesses and, in some cases, video evidence. This pattern of behavior constitutes a clear violation of federal transportation law." Robert Collins had recovered his professional composure, though alarm was evident in his eyes. "Inspector Bennett, I assure you that Meridian Airways takes these allegations extremely seriously. We will conduct a thorough investigation. This is not a matter for internal investigation alone," Michael clarified. "As a federal inspector, I am initiating an official FAA inquiry into discriminatory practices on Meridian Airways Flight 735 with potential implications for the carrier's compliance record and certification." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Everyone in the cabin understood the gravity of this declaration. An FAA investigation was no minor matter. It could result in significant fines, operational restrictions, and damage to the airline's safety rating. In addition, Michael continued, "I am requesting a full audit of passenger complaint records for the past 3 years, specifically reviewing incidents involving minority passengers in premium cabins." Victoria's composure finally broke. "This is absurd. You cannot do this based on one perceived slight. You are abusing your authority because your feelings were hurt over champagne service." Captain Palmer stepped forward. "That is enough, Victoria. You are making this worse." Michael remained calm, his badge still visible in his hand. "Ms. Newman, this is not about hurt feelings. This is about a pattern of behavior that violates federal law and creates a hostile environment for passengers. Every air carrier operating in U.S. airspace is required to provide non-discriminatory service. That is not a preference or a courtesy. It is a legal obligation." James Whitfield, who had been watching the scene unfold with growing discomfort, attempted one last intervention. "Surely this can be resolved without a federal case. Perhaps some compensation, an apology." "Mr. Whitfield," Vanessa interjected. "This is not about compensation. It is about ensuring that the next black couple who boards this airline does not experience what we did. It is about accountability." Alexandra Williams had been quietly documenting the entire exchange. "I have to say," she added, "as someone who reviews premium cabins professionally, I have never witnessed such blatant service discrimination, and I have never seen a more appropriate response." Robert Collins, recognizing the severity of the situation, addressed Michael directly. "Inspector Bennett, on behalf of Meridian Airways, I extend our deepest apologies for your experience. I assure you that this does not reflect our company values or training. We will cooperate fully with any FAA investigation and take immediate corrective action." Michael nodded acknowledgement, but remained focused on Victoria, who now stood pale and rigid, the full implications of her actions finally dawning on her. "Ms. Newman," he said, his tone neither angry nor triumphant, but matter-of-fact. "When you looked at my wife and me, you saw people who did not belong in first class. You never considered that you might be serving a federal official with direct oversight of your industry. That error in judgment will have consequences, not just for you, but for an airline culture that allowed your behavior to go unchecked for what I suspect has been many years." Victoria remained silent, her career flashing before her eyes. Michael turned to the other passengers in the cabin. "I apologize to everyone for this delay. This was not how my wife and I intended to celebrate our anniversary, but sometimes addressing injustice takes precedence over personal comfort." As he returned his badge to his inner pocket, the first-class cabin erupted into spontaneous applause, led by the Hoffmans, joined by Alexandra Williams and Thomas Jenkins, and finally, reluctantly, even James Whitfield. It was not applause for authority or retribution, but for dignity maintained in the face of discrimination, for the quiet power of knowledge over ignorance, of justice over prejudice. The badge moment had transformed what might have been just another incident of normalized discrimination into a watershed moment for Meridian Airways and possibly the entire industry. The jetway connected with a gentle thud as ground crew secured it to the aircraft door. Inside the first-class cabin, the atmosphere remained charged with tension and anticipation. Victoria Newman stood rigidly by the galley, her face a mask of professional neutrality that barely concealed her inner turmoil. Robert Collins, Meridian's London station manager, was engaged in an intense but hushed conversation with Captain Palmer, occasionally glancing toward Michael and Vanessa. "What happens now?" Vanessa asked quietly, collecting her belongings. "The official process begins," Michael replied. "My report will trigger a mandatory investigation by both the airline and the FAA's Office of Civil Rights." Luis approached the Bennetts, his expression a mixture of regret and relief. "Dr. and Mr. Bennett, I wanted to apologize again. I should have done more to intervene." "You were in a difficult position," Luis, Vanessa assured him. "Standing up to a superior is not easy, especially when you are new to the job." Still, Luis persisted. "I knew what was happening was wrong. Others have noticed Victoria's behavior before, but no one has had the authority to really address it." "That changes today," Michael said. "Would you be willing to provide a statement about your observations? Not just from this flight, but any pattern you have witnessed during your training?" Luis hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Yes, I would. Several of us junior crew members have discussed her tendencies when it comes to certain passengers. But she has been with the airline for so long and she has connections in management. Your testimony could help ensure this does not happen to other passengers," Michael encouraged. "Then yes, absolutely," Luis decided. "I will provide whatever information you need." As Luis moved away to prepare for deplaning, Alexandra Williams approached from 2A. "I have uploaded my notes and recordings to secure storage," she told them quietly. "I have a significant platform in the travel industry, and with your permission, I would like to cover this incident in my review. Not as a scandal, but as an important accountability moment for the airline industry." "We appreciate that," Vanessa replied. "This is not about punishing one flight attendant. It is about addressing a culture that enables discrimination." "Exactly," Alexandra agreed. "I have documented similar incidents on other airlines, though rarely this blatant. The industry needs this spotlight." Thomas Jenkins joined their conversation, extending his business card to Michael. "Inspector Bennett, I would like to add my observations to your report. As a frequent Meridian passenger, I have noticed inconsistencies in how different passengers are treated. I simply did not have the framework to address it formally until today." Michael accepted the card with a nod of appreciation. "Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. Your perspective as a Diamond member will be valuable." Across the aisle, Elizabeth Hoffman leaned toward Vanessa. "Dr. Bennett, I feel I must apologize for benefiting from the preferential treatment that came at your expense. We had no idea what was happening." "You have nothing to apologize for, Mrs. Hoffman," Vanessa assured her. "You were not responsible for Victoria's actions." Still, Richard Hoffman added, "We have flown first class for years and always assumed everyone received the same level of service. It has been eye-opening to witness the disparity firsthand." Their conversation was interrupted by Robert Collins, who approached with a professional smile that did not quite mask his concern. "Inspector and Dr. Bennett, we have arranged for you to deplane first. A representative from our VIP services will escort you to the arrival lounge where we can discuss this matter more privately. Your luggage will be expedited through customs." "Thank you, Mr. Collins," Michael replied, "but we will deplane with the other first-class passengers as originally scheduled. We do not require special treatment, only equal treatment." Collins nodded, understanding the message. "Of course. In that case, if you are willing, I would appreciate the opportunity to meet with you in our arrival lounge after deplaning. Our regional director for Europe would like to address your concerns personally." "We will be there," Michael confirmed. As the cabin door was opened and deplaning began, Victoria made one last attempt to salvage the situation. She approached Michael and Vanessa with a tight smile. "Inspector Bennett," she said, her voice carefully modulated, "I want to personally apologize for any misunderstanding during our flight. It was never my intention to make you or your wife feel unwelcome." The apology was clearly performative, designed for the listening ears of management rather than genuine remorse. Michael regarded her with the same calm assessment he brought to aircraft inspections. "Ms. Newman, what occurred on this flight was not a misunderstanding. It was a documented pattern of discriminatory behavior that violated both federal regulations and your employer's policies. The appropriate forum for addressing this is through official channels, not a rushed apology on deplaning." Victoria's facade cracked slightly, her tone taking on an edge of desperation. "You are going to ruin my career over perceived slights. Is that really necessary? 22 years of service thrown away because you felt your champagne was not poured properly." Vanessa stepped forward, meeting Victoria's gaze directly. "Ms. Newman, this was never about champagne. It was about dignity. And your response, even now, characterizing discriminatory treatment as perceived slights, demonstrates that you still do not understand the severity of your actions." "I understand that you are using your husband's position to punish me," Victoria retorted, abandoning pretense. Michael's expression remained unchanged. "My report will contain only factual observations corroborated by multiple witnesses. Any consequences will result from your actions, not our response to them." As the first-class passengers began to move toward the exit, James Whitfield made one final comment loud enough for others to hear. "This whole situation has been blown completely out of proportion. In my day, people knew how to handle minor service issues without turning them into federal cases. To everyone's surprise, it was Richard Hoffman who responded. In your day, James, certain passengers were expected to accept substandard treatment without complaint. Times change, thankfully." Whitfield fell silent, unprepared for rebuke from someone he considered a peer. As Michael and Vanessa collected their carry-on bags and moved toward the exit, Luis approached one last time, offering his business card. "My contact information," he explained, "for your report. And thank you for standing up. It matters more than you know." Deplaning proceeded in an atmosphere of subdued tension. As passengers entered the terminal, Victoria remained behind in the aircraft, engaged in what appeared to be an increasingly uncomfortable conversation with Captain Palmer and another crew member who had boarded, likely a chief purser or union representative. In the jetway, Alexandra Williams fell into step beside the Bennetts. The story is already breaking on social media, she informed them quietly. One of the passengers in business class overheard part of what happened and posted about it. Meridian discrimination is trending. That was fast, Vanessa observed. Stories like this resonate because they are so familiar to so many travelers, Alexandra explained. The only difference is that most passengers do not have the authority to trigger actual accountability. As they entered Terminal 5's arrivals area, they were met by a Meridian Airways representative holding a tablet with their names displayed. The representative, a young black woman in a corporate uniform, approached with professional courtesy. Dr. and Inspector Bennett. I am Amara Jackson, Customer Experience Manager for Meridian's London operations. Our team is prepared to meet with you whenever you are ready. We have arranged a private room in our arrival lounge, and our European Regional Director Caroline Phillips is on her way from our offices. Thank you, Ms. Jackson, Michael replied. We will join you shortly. We would like a moment first. As the representative stepped away, Vanessa turned to Michael. Well, they are certainly taking this seriously now. They understand the stakes, Michael said. An official FAA investigation could impact their routes, result in significant fines, and damage their reputation. They will do everything possible to demonstrate responsive action. Will it make a difference? Vanessa asked. Beyond this one incident, I mean. Michael considered the question. That depends on how deep the problem goes. If Victoria's behavior is an isolated case, perhaps, but if it reflects broader cultural issues within the airline, then more comprehensive measures will be needed. Vanessa finished his thought. They watched as other first-class passengers emerged from the jetway. The Hoffmans nodded respectfully as they passed. Thomas Jenkins gave a supportive thumbs up. James Whitfield hurried past without making eye contact. Alexandra Williams approached one last time. I am heading to my connection, but I wanted to leave you with this. She handed Vanessa a business card. My contact information. I would be interested in following the resolution of this situation for a more in-depth piece on accountability in the airline industry if you are open to it. We will consider it, Vanessa promised, tucking the card into her bag. As Alexandra departed, Michael and Vanessa found themselves momentarily alone, standing in the bustling terminal that marked the beginning of their long-awaited anniversary trip. Not exactly how we planned to start our celebration, Vanessa observed with a rueful smile. Michael took her hand, his touch gentle but reassuring. No, but perhaps necessary nonetheless. You know what you always say about surgical complications? Vanessa nodded. Sometimes the most important surgery is the one you did not plan for. Exactly. This was not on our itinerary, but it matters. It matters for every passenger who does not have an FAA badge to protect them. Vanessa leaned against him briefly, drawing strength from his steady presence. I know, and I am proud of how you handled it. I hope we can still salvage our anniversary, that this does not overshadow the next 2 weeks. Michael smiled, squeezing her hand. Trust me, once we have addressed this properly, we are going to have the celebration we planned. This is just a detour, not our destination. Together they walked toward the Meridian Airways lounge, where airline executives were frantically assembling to address the situation. The power dynamic had shifted irreversibly, and what had begun as a routine case of discrimination had transformed into a potentially industry-changing moment of accountability. In Victoria Newman's 22 years of service, she had likely engaged in similar behavior countless times without consequence. But on this particular flight, her assumption about who belonged in first class had finally met its match. The badge Michael carried represented more than federal authority. It represented a promise that rules applied equally to everyone, even those who believed themselves exempt. The Meridian Airways. First-class lounge at Heathrow Terminal 5 was designed to epitomize British luxury. All leather club chairs, subtle lighting, and discreet service. Today, however, it had been transformed into an impromptu crisis management center. A private meeting room had been commandeered blinds, drawn against curious eyes as Meridian executives huddled inside. Michael and Vanessa Bennett sat on one side of a polished conference table, their postures relaxed but attentive. Across from them were Caroline Phillips, Meridian's European Regional Director, Robert Collins, the London Station Manager, and Emma Bradford, the airline's Chief Legal Counsel for International Operations, who had been summoned from her weekend off. First and foremost, Caroline began, her crisp British accent conveying practiced sincerity. "I want to extend our deepest apologies for your experience on Flight 735. What you have described represents a complete failure of our service standards and values as an organization." Michael nodded acknowledgement, but remained silent, allowing her to continue. "We are treating this with the utmost seriousness," Caroline assured them. "Victoria Newman has been suspended pending investigation, and we have already begun interviewing other crew members and passengers." Emma Bradford interjected with the careful precision of an experienced attorney. "Inspector Bennett, we understand you have indicated your intention to file an official FAA report regarding this incident. While that is absolutely your right, we hope you might consider allowing Meridian to demonstrate our commitment to addressing these issues internally first." Michael's expression remained neutral. "Ms. Bradford, I appreciate your position. However, federal regulations are clear. As a certified inspector who directly witnessed multiple violations of 14 CFR Part 91, 533, I am required to file a formal report." Emma nodded, having expected this answer. "Of course. In that case, we want to assure you that Meridian will cooperate fully with any investigation. We are prepared to provide complete access to our training materials, service standards, documentation, and passenger complaint records." "That is appreciated," Michael replied. "The investigation will be thorough and impartial." Caroline leaned forward, her expression earnest. "What happened to you was inexcusable, and we want to make it right. We would like to offer you a full refund of your tickets, complimentary first-class return flights, additional compensatory miles, and our most sincere apologies." Vanessa exchanged a glance with Michael before responding. "Ms. Phillips, while we appreciate the offer, this is not about compensation. It is about ensuring that other passengers do not experience what we did." "Absolutely," Caroline agreed quickly. "In addition to addressing this specific incident, we are prepared to conduct a comprehensive review of our training procedures and service protocols." Michael finally spoke. "That is a start. But I am concerned this may reflect deeper cultural issues within Meridian. Our experience today was not subtle. It was blatant, consistent discrimination that multiple passengers recognized immediately. That suggests an environment where such behavior is, if not encouraged, at least tolerated." The executives exchanged uncomfortable glances. Robert Collins cleared his throat. "Inspector Bennett, I have been with Meridian for 15 years, and I can assure you that discrimination is not part of our culture. However," he added hastily as Michael raised an eyebrow, "your point about Victoria's behavior being so overt is well taken. It does raise questions about oversight and accountability." The meeting continued for another hour, with the Meridian team outlining their proposed response: an internal investigation, enhanced training, and a review of passenger complaint data. Michael provided a detailed account of the incidents during the flight, and Vanessa offered her perspective as a professional who had navigated discrimination throughout her career. As the meeting concluded, Caroline made one final appeal. "Dr. and Inspector Bennett, we hope this unfortunate incident will not permanently color your perception of Meridian Airways. We are committed to doing better. That commitment will be measured by actions, not words," Michael replied evenly. "I will be monitoring the response closely." Outside the lounge, the Bennetts were met by a Meridian representative who escorted them to their waiting car service. As they settled into the luxury vehicle for the drive to their hotel in Mayfair, Vanessa checked her phone for the first time since landing. "Michael," she said, her voice tinged with surprise, "you need to see this." She handed him her phone, which displayed a Twitter thread that had already garnered over 20,000 retweets. Alexandra Williams had posted a carefully worded account of the incident without naming the Bennetts specifically, but detailing the discriminatory treatment and the revelation of Michael's FAA credentials. The hashtag #FlyingWhileBlack was trending alongside #Meridian Discrimination. Travelers were sharing their own experiences of mistreatment in premium cabins across multiple airlines. That escalated quickly, Michael observed. It is not just Alexandra. Vanessa continued scrolling through her notifications. Several passengers from our flight have posted about it. Someone in business class captured video of Victoria being escorted off the aircraft after we landed. Their phones began buzzing with incoming calls and messages. Colleagues, friends, and family who had seen the viral posts and recognized the description of a black FAA inspector and his surgeon wife. "We should probably address this," Vanessa suggested, "before the narrative spins out of control." Michael nodded, composing a brief statement which they both reviewed before posting. As the passengers involved in today's incident on Meridian Airways Flight 735, we confirm that we experienced discriminatory treatment that will be addressed through appropriate official channels. We appreciate the support, but ask for privacy as we continue our anniversary trip and as proper procedures unfold. This was about accountability, not publicity. As their car navigated London's crowded streets, the media explosion continued. Aviation blogs picked up the story, followed by mainstream outlets. The business implications were immediately apparent. Meridian Airways stock had already dropped 3% as investors reacted to the potential fallout. By the time they checked into their hotel suite at the Connaught, the story had gone global. CNN was running a segment titled "First Class Discrimination, FAA Inspector Exposes Airline Practices." The BBC had contacted Meridian for comment on allegations of discriminatory service practices. The Wall Street Journal was analyzing the potential financial impact of an FAA investigation. So much for keeping a low profile on our anniversary. Vanessa sighed, sinking onto the plush sofa in their suite. Michael sat beside her, taking her hand. "We can still have our celebration. The media cycle will move on, but for now this conversation needed to happen." "I know," Vanessa agreed. "It is just... I have spent my career being Dr. Bennett, focusing on the work rather than fighting every battle. Sometimes it is exhausting to become a symbol instead of just being allowed to exist." "I understand," Michael said softly. "If you want to issue a no further comment and focus on our anniversary, we can do that. The official process will continue regardless." Vanessa considered this, then shook her head. "No, this matters. But let us be strategic about it. One comprehensive statement, then we focus on us." They crafted a more detailed statement which Vanessa posted on her professional social media accounts. "As a black woman who has navigated predominantly white spaces throughout my career, today's incident on Meridian Airways was unfortunately familiar. The assumption that we did not belong in first class, despite having paid full fare, reflects biases that persist across industries. My husband's position as an FAA inspector provided accountability that most passengers do not have access to. This is not about one flight attendant, but about airline cultures that enable discrimination. We are working with Meridian and regulatory authorities to ensure lasting change. Now we are returning to our anniversary celebration, grateful for the support and hopeful that our experience will lead to more equitable treatment for all travelers." The statement was immediately amplified across platforms, reshared by colleagues in medicine and aviation, and picked up by news outlets seeking comment. By evening, it had been viewed over 1 million times. Their phones continued buzzing with notifications, but they silenced them, determined to reclaim their celebration. A bottle of champagne arrived from the hotel manager who had recognized them from the news. The card read simply, "With our compliments and respect." As they prepared for their dinner reservation at a Michelin-starred restaurant, Vanessa paused, looking at her reflection in the mirror. Her silk blouse still bore the faint stain from Victoria's accidental coffee spill. "I should change," she murmured. Michael came up behind her, meeting her eyes in the reflection. "You know what, wear it. It is part of our story now. And besides," he added with a smile, "you still look stunning." Vanessa laughed, the tension of the day finally breaking. "Fine. But you are not just saying that because you are afraid of your wife. The scary heart surgeon, are you?" "Terrified," Michael confirmed with a grin. "Almost as scared as Victoria was when she saw my badge." They shared a moment of laughter, reclaiming joy from a day that had begun with discrimination and evolved into something more profound, a potential catalyst for change. As they left their hotel, they were unaware that across the Atlantic, Meridian Airways corporate headquarters in Atlanta had declared an all-hands emergency, with executives being called back from weekend plans for crisis management. Victoria Newman had been placed on administrative leave, her personnel file pulled for review. The company's entire diversity and inclusion program was being scrutinized in preparation for the inevitable FAA investigation. What had started as microaggressions against two first-class passengers had escalated into a full-blown corporate crisis with regulatory implications. For Michael and Vanessa Bennett, it was a detour on their anniversary journey. For Meridian Airways, it was the beginning of a reckoning. In the gleaming glass headquarters of Meridian Airways in Atlanta, the Sunday morning calm had been shattered by emergency notifications pinging on executives' phones. The company's crisis management protocol had been activated at the highest level, code red. The executive conference room on the 27th floor, normally reserved for quarterly board meetings, was now command central for what insiders were already calling the Bennett incident. Digital displays showed real-time social media metrics, stock price fluctuations, and breaking news coverage. The hashtag Meridian Discrimination had generated over 200,000 posts in less than 24 hours. CEO Jonathan Blake, a silver-haired veteran of the airline industry, surveyed the room with barely contained fury. At 59, Blake had navigated fuel crises, terrorist threats, and global pandemics. But this, a discrimination incident involving a federal inspector with regulatory authority, represented a unique threat. "Someone explained to me," he began, his voice dangerously quiet, "how a single flight attendant's actions have managed to wipe $325 million from our market cap in one day." Melissa Cortez, Chief Marketing Officer, gestured to one of the screens. "The timing could not be worse. We just launched our premium experience for all campaign last month. The contrast between our advertising and this incident is problematic." "Problematic," Blake echoed incredulously. "Our stock is down 7% and still falling. The FAA has officially notified us of a pending investigation. We have received inquiries from 3 congressional committees. Problematic does not begin to cover it." David Whitaker, Chief Legal Officer, consulted his tablet before speaking. "We have completed our preliminary review of Victoria Newman's personnel file. There were warning signs we should have caught." Blake's eyes narrowed. "What kind of warning signs?" 3 passenger complaints in the past 2 years, specifically alleging racial bias in service. All were handled at the station level as standard customer service issues with compensatory miles offered. None were escalated to HR or senior management. "Jesus Christ," Blake muttered. "And her performance reviews consistently positive from her direct supervisors," Whitaker replied. "Described as maintaining high standards and upholding the premium cabin experience." The implications hung in the air. Those high standards may have been code for discriminatory practices that had been tacitly approved. "What about the rest of the crew?" Blake asked. "We have interviewed the captain, the junior flight attendant, Luis Morales, and another crew member named Daniela Rodriguez," responded Sarah Mitchell, VP of In-Flight Services. Captain Palmer's account corroborates Inspector Bennett's completely. Luis and Daniela both indicated that Victoria's behavior was not unusual, that she frequently provided different levels of service to passengers she deemed less deserving of first-class treatment. Different levels of service, Blake repeated, disgust evident in his tone. And supervisors never addressed this. According to Luis, newer crew members noticed the pattern but felt powerless to address it, given Victoria's seniority and connections within the company, Mitchell explained. He specifically mentioned that she is close friends with Regional VP Thomas Anderson. Blake's expression darkened further. Where is Anderson now? He is refusing to return calls, Mitchell admitted. But we have found emails indicating he intervened personally when one of the previous complaints against Victoria was filed. He characterized it as a misunderstanding and had it resolved at the lowest level. Find him, Blake ordered, and prepare termination paperwork for both him and Newman. This goes beyond one flight attendant. This is a failure of oversight and accountability. The crisis team continued methodically through their assessment. The PR disaster was expanding hourly. Travel bloggers were combing through years of reviews identifying patterns of discriminatory service across multiple airlines, but highlighting Meridian in particular. Former employees were coming forward with allegations of an entrenched culture that catered to wealthy white passengers while treating others with suspicion. Our diversity and inclusion training is inadequate, admitted Frank Patterson, Chief Human Resources Officer, projecting a document onto the main screen. The current module is a 22-minute video last updated in 2014 with a 5-question multiple-choice quiz. Completion is required during initial training but not reinforced during recurrent training. Replace it, Blake ordered. Immediately. I want a comprehensive interactive program developed with outside experts. Make it mandatory for every employee starting with senior leadership. As the meeting progressed, the damage assessment grew increasingly dire. Beyond the immediate PR crisis and pending FAA investigation, Meridian faced potential class action lawsuits from passengers who believed they had experienced similar discrimination. Several corporate clients had already contacted their account managers, expressing concern about continuing their travel contracts with an airline under investigation for discriminatory practices. What do we know about the Bennetts? Blake asked, turning to the intelligence gathered on the passengers at the center of the storm. Dr. Vanessa Bennett is a cardiothoracic surgeon at Johns Hopkins with an impressive publication record and several pioneering surgical techniques to her credit, reported Whitaker. Inspector Michael Bennett has been with the FAA for 20 years, currently serving as a Senior Safety Inspector in the Air Carrier Division. His record is impeccable, with a reputation for thorough but fair investigations. Not exactly the couple you want to discriminate against, Blake observed dryly. They have issued public statements but are declining further comment while continuing their anniversary trip in London, Melissa Cortez added. Their approach has been measured and professional, which is actually amplifying their credibility in the public sphere. And what about the travel blogger who documented everything Blake asked? Alexandra Williams, over 500,000 followers across platforms specializing in premium cabin reviews, Cortez replied. She has published a detailed account of her observations, including specific instances of discriminatory treatment. Her audience is primarily affluent travelers, our core premium cabin demographic. Blake's jaw tightened. So our most valuable customer segment is reading first-hand accounts of how we discriminate against black passengers in first class. Perfect. The meeting continued for hours as the crisis team developed response strategies. By late afternoon, they had formulated an action plan that Blake would present to the board of directors that evening. It included immediate termination of Victoria Newman and any supervisors who had enabled or covered up discriminatory behavior, a comprehensive external audit of service standards, training practices, and complaint handling procedures, development of a new mandatory diversity and inclusion training program for all 22,000 Meridian employees, appointment of a chief inclusion officer reporting directly to the CEO, implementation of anonymous reporting systems for both passengers and employees to flag discriminatory treatment, a public apology, and commitment to transparent reform. The estimated cost of these measures, excluding potential FAA fines, lawsuit settlements, and lost revenue from damaged reputation, exceeded $40 million. It is a steep price, Blake acknowledged as the meeting concluded, but the alternative is worse. We either address this decisively now, or we watch our premium brand deteriorate while fending off regulators and lawsuits for years. As executives filed out of the conference room, Blake stopped Sarah Mitchell, the VP of In-Flight Services. "Sarah, I need complete honesty here. Is this an isolated incident, or do we have a genuine cultural problem?" Mitchell hesitated before responding. "In 20 years with this airline, I have seen patterns. Nothing we have officially acknowledged, but yes, certain passengers receive different treatment based on how they look, especially in premium cabins. It is subtle enough to maintain plausible deniability, but consistent enough that minority passengers notice." Blake nodded grimly. "Then we deserve what is coming, and it is long overdue." That evening, Meridian Airways issued a public statement. Meridian Airways acknowledges and deeply regrets the discriminatory treatment experienced by Dr. Vanessa Bennett and Inspector Michael Bennett on our Flight 735. This incident represents a profound failure of our service standards and values. Effective immediately, we have initiated a comprehensive review of our training service protocols and corporate culture with particular focus on ensuring equitable treatment of all passengers regardless of race, gender, or background. Personnel directly involved in this incident have been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. We are cooperating fully with the FAA's inquiry and have engaged independent experts to help us identify and address any structural or cultural issues within our organization that may enable discriminatory behavior. To our passengers, employees, and shareholders, we have failed to uphold our commitment to equal treatment and dignity for all. For that, we sincerely apologize. The work of rebuilding trust begins today with concrete actions rather than mere words. The statement was met with skepticism across social media, but financial analysts noted its uncharacteristic directness and commitment to specific reforms. Meridian's stock price stabilized, though still significantly below its pre-incident level. In London, Michael and Vanessa Bennett had turned off their phones for a performance at the Royal Opera House, a planned highlight of their anniversary trip. They remained unaware that their experience had triggered a corporate meltdown across the Atlantic, one that would ultimately transform not just one airline, but industry practices worldwide. For Victoria Newman, who sat alone in her Atlanta apartment watching her career and reputation disintegrate on live television, the realization was still sinking in. The black couple she had deemed unworthy of first-class service had just changed the trajectory of an entire corporation. 3 days after the incident on Flight 735, the Federal Aviation Administration's Office of Civil Rights launched its official investigation into Meridian Airways. What might normally have been a routine inquiry had been elevated to priority status with a team of 7 investigators assigned. The investigation headquarters was established in a secure conference room at the FAA's Eastern Region offices in New York. The walls were covered with timeline charts, service flow diagrams, and passenger complaint statistics. Digital displays showed the Meridian Airways route map and organizational hierarchy. Lead investigator Rachel Torres surveyed her team, a mixture of aviation safety specialists, civil rights attorneys, and data analysts. At 43, Torres had spent 15 years investigating regulatory violations across the industry. The Bennett case was rapidly becoming the most significant of her career. "All right, let us establish what we know definitively," she began addressing the team. Inspector Bennett has submitted his official report documenting 23 specific instances of disparate treatment on Flight 735. His account has been corroborated by statements from 5 other passengers, including a professional travel reviewer who provided photographic evidence of service discrepancies. She gestured to a screen displaying side-by-side images of meals served to different passengers in the same cabin, the stark contrast in presentation immediately apparent. Captain Andrew Palmer's statement confirms that he observed discriminatory behavior after being alerted by Inspector Bennett. 2 flight attendants, Luis Morales and Daniela Rodriguez, have provided testimonies indicating that the behavior displayed by Victoria Newman was not an isolated incident, but rather a pattern that was known among crew members. "What about Meridian's initial response?" asked James Carter, the team's legal specialist. They have suspended Newman pending internal investigation, Torres replied. They have also placed Regional VP Thomas Anderson on administrative leave after evidence emerged that he had previously intervened to downplay complaints against Newman. CEO Jonathan Blake has issued a public statement acknowledging the incident and pledging cooperation with our investigation. Torres moved to the next screen, displaying a statistical analysis. Now this is where it gets interesting. We have obtained Meridian's passenger complaint records for the past 3 years. Our data team has identified a statistical anomaly. Complaints alleging discriminatory treatment in premium cabins are 340% more common for Meridian than the industry average. The room fell silent as the investigators absorbed this information. That is not just a bad apple, observed Maria Gonzalez, civil rights specialist. That suggests a permissive culture at minimum, possibly an encouraged practice. Exactly, Torres agreed. And when we cross-reference the complaints by cabin crew involved, Newman's name appears in 27 separate incidents, only 3 of which were formally documented as potential discrimination. The others were classified as service quality issues and resolved with compensatory miles. What about their training programs? Asked Carter. Torres clicked to another screen. Meridian's current diversity and inclusion training consists of a 22-minute video last updated in 2014, followed by a basic quiz. It is required during initial training but not reinforced during recurrent training. In comparison, their service standards training for premium cabins is 12 hours of instruction with quarterly updates and annual recertification. So they spend 12 hours teaching flight attendants how to pour champagne correctly, but 22 minutes on treating passengers equally. Carter summarized. That speaks volumes about priorities. The investigation expanded beyond Flight 735 to examine Meridian's corporate culture more broadly. Interviews were conducted with current and former employees across divisions. The findings were troubling. A former flight attendant trainer revealed an unofficial customer profile for first-class passengers that was taught to new hires, describing typical premium passengers in terms that implicitly excluded minorities. A statistical analysis of random secondary screenings at gates showed that Black and Middle Eastern passengers were selected at rates significantly higher than their representation among Meridian's premium cabin travelers. Internal communications revealed that customer complaints about discrimination were routinely downgraded to service issues to avoid mandatory reporting requirements. 2 weeks into the investigation, Torres presented the preliminary findings to FAA Administrator Eleanor Richardson in Washington, D.C. The evidence indicates this is not an isolated incident involving one flight attendant, Torres concluded. Meridian Airways has demonstrated a pattern of discriminatory practices in premium cabins, inadequate training on equal treatment requirements, and a troubling habit of minimizing complaints related to discrimination. Richardson reviewed the report with a grave expression. Recommendations. We are pursuing a dual approach, Torres explained. First, specific penalties for the Flight 735 incident under 14 CFR Part 91.533 regarding discriminatory treatment of passengers. Second, a broader corrective action plan addressing the organizational failures that enabled this pattern of behavior. Potential fine range. For the specific incident, the statutory maximum is $250,000. Given the egregiousness of the violations and the fact that a senior Meridian employee attempted to threaten a passenger for reporting discrimination, we are recommending the maximum. Richardson nodded. And the broader corrective action. We are recommending a consent order requiring Meridian to develop and implement a comprehensive anti-discrimination training program for all customer-facing employees with annual recertification requirements. Establish an independent ombudsman office to handle discrimination complaints with direct reporting to the FAA's Office of Civil Rights for the next 3 years. Conduct quarterly audits of service quality across passenger demographics with results published publicly. Implement anonymous secret passenger testing to identify and address discriminatory practices. The estimated compliance cost for Meridian would exceed $18 million, not including the specific penalty for Flight 735. Richardson considered the recommendations. This will send shockwaves through the industry. Yes, ma'am, Torres agreed. But the evidence supports it, and frankly, it is overdue. Inspector Bennett's involvement makes this particularly sensitive, Richardson noted. We need to ensure the investigation is beyond reproach. Have we addressed any potential concerns about conflict of interest? Inspector Bennett recused himself from any investigative role immediately after filing his initial report. Torres confirmed. His sole involvement has been as a witness providing his account of events, the same as any other passenger would. All investigative work has been conducted independently by my team. Good, Richardson approved. Proceed with the recommendations. I want this handled by the book, every I dotted and T crossed. The airlines will fight this, and I want our case to be ironclad. The FAA's preliminary findings were delivered to Meridian Airways on a Wednesday morning 3 weeks after the incident. The 78-page document detailed specific violations and outlined the proposed penalties and corrective actions. Within hours, Meridian's stock dropped another 5% as the market reacted to news of the potential $250,000 fine and costly mandated reforms. Industry analysts noted that the financial impact extended far beyond the monetary penalties. The reputational damage and required operational changes represented a significant long-term cost. CEO Jonathan Blake convened an emergency board meeting to address the findings. The boardroom atmosphere was tense as directors confronted the full implications of the investigation. The FAA's assessment is damning, Blake acknowledged. But I have reviewed the evidence myself and I cannot dispute their conclusions. We have a problem, not just with individual employees but with our culture and systems. What are our options? Asked Board Chair Elizabeth Montgomery. We can fight it, which would mean years of litigation, ongoing negative publicity, and potentially even more severe penalties if we lose, Blake replied. Or we can accept the findings, pay the fine, implement the required changes, and try to get ahead of this by demonstrating genuine commitment to reform. The board debated briefly before reaching consensus. Meridian would accept the FAA's findings and proposed remedies while implementing additional voluntary measures to demonstrate their commitment to change. The airline's formal response acknowledged the violations and accepted responsibility without qualification, a rarity in an industry accustomed to fighting regulatory actions. Meridian agreed to all proposed corrective measures and announced several additional steps. Creation of a new executive position, Chief Diversity Officer, reporting directly to the CEO. Formation of a passenger advocacy council including diversity experts and frequent travelers from underrepresented groups. Revision of performance metrics for cabin crew to explicitly include equitable treatment measures. Publication of an annual inclusion report detailing progress and ongoing challenges. The response was calculated to demonstrate that Meridian was treating this as a watershed moment rather than a public relations problem to be managed. For Victoria Newman, the regulatory consequences were career-ending. The FAA formally revoked her flight attendant certification, an extremely rare action typically reserved for safety violations or criminal conduct. The revocation effectively barred her from working as a flight attendant for any U.S. carrier. Thomas Anderson, the regional VP who had protected Newman, resigned rather than face termination. Internal documents revealed he had regularly buried discrimination complaints against multiple flight attendants, describing them in one email as diversity noise that distracted from real service issues. 6 weeks after the incident, Michael Bennett received a secure email from Rachel Torres summarizing the investigation's outcomes. The message was professional but included a personal note at the end. Inspector Bennett, while I know this was not how you and Dr. Bennett intended to spend your anniversary, your willingness to document and report these violations will have lasting impact. Some changes only happen when the right person witnesses the wrong behavior at the right time. Thank you for your service to the FAA and to the flying public. In London, where they had extended their stay to avoid the media attention in the U.S., Michael shared the email with Vanessa over dinner at their favorite discovered restaurant, a small Italian place in Notting Hill where they had become regulars. So it is official, Vanessa observed after reading Torres's message. Organization-wide change from one flight. Michael nodded, taking a sip of his wine. One flight where they picked the wrong passengers to discriminate against. Do you think it will last? Vanessa asked. These changes, I mean. Or is this just crisis management that will fade once the spotlight moves on? Michael considered the question. The regulatory requirements will ensure compliance for at least 3 years. Beyond that, it depends on whether Meridian truly embraces the cultural change or just goes through the motions. I suppose that is true of any institutional reform, Vanessa reflected. Real change requires more than new policies. It requires new perspectives. As they finished their meal, Michael's phone buzzed with a notification from the FAA Secure Messaging System. It was a brief update from Administrator Richardson, Inspector Bennett. Following our investigation into Meridian Airways, we are expanding our review to include service standardization across all major U.S. carriers. Your experience has highlighted industry-wide issues that warrant broader examination. Thank you for your professionalism throughout this process. Michael showed the message to Vanessa, whose expression shifted from surprise to satisfaction. So this goes beyond one airline, she said. It could change the entire industry. It is a start, Michael replied. Not a solution, but definitely a start. As they walked back to their hotel through London's rain-washed streets, they reflected on how their anniversary trip had transformed into something neither of them had anticipated. A catalyst for change that extended far beyond their personal experience. The regulatory consequences of Flight 735 would ultimately reshape not just one airline's practices, but industry standards for equitable treatment. What began as microaggressions against 2 first-class passengers had escalated into a moment of reckoning for an entire sector. For Meridian Airways, the path forward was clear but challenging rebuild, not just policies and procedures, but the fundamental culture that had allowed discrimination to flourish beneath a veneer of premium service. 6 months after the incident on Meridian Airways Flight 735, Victoria Newman stood behind the counter of Hudson News at Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, arranging travel magazines on the display rack. Each glossy cover featured luxurious airline cabins she would never again work in. At 47, with her flight attendant certification permanently revoked, Victoria had struggled to find employment. Her name and face had become recognizable after weeks of media coverage, her actions dissected across news programs and social media. The Meridian discrimination incident, as it was now called in industry circles, had made her virtually unemployable in customer service roles. The Hudson News position had been a last resort, minimum wage work at the very airport where she had once strutted confidently in her Meridian uniform. The cruel irony was not lost on her. She now sold overpriced snacks and magazines to the same premium passengers she had once served champagne to at 35,000 feet. The final indignity came on a Tuesday afternoon when she looked up to see a familiar face approaching the counter, Luis Morales, her former junior colleague now wearing the senior flight attendant uniform of Delta Airlines. Victoria, he acknowledged his tone neutral as he placed a bottle of water and protein bar on the counter. Luis, she replied stiffly, $7.84. As she rang up his purchase, Luis hesitated, then spoke quietly. I wanted to hate you, you know, after everything that happened, but mostly I just feel sad. Victoria's hands stilled on the register. Sad. For me, do not waste your pity. I am fine. Not for you, Luis clarified. For all the passengers you mistreated over the years. For the junior crew members who learned the wrong lessons watching you. For an industry that allowed your behavior for so long. Victoria's face flushed. You have no idea what this industry was like when I started. Standards meant something. Not everyone belonged in premium cabins. Luis shook his head sadly. That is exactly the attitude that got us here. By the way, I just completed Delta's new equity and service training. Your name comes up in the case studies as the example of what not to do. He collected his purchase and turned to leave, then paused. The Bennetts are doing well, in case you were wondering. Dr. Bennett just received a major medical award and Inspector Bennett has been promoted. Their story has changed airline service for the better. As Louise walked away, Victoria stood frozen, the full weight of her choices finally settling over her. Her 22-year career, her identity as a respected purser, her financial stability, all gone because she could not accept that a black couple belonged in first class. Across the country in Baltimore, Dr. Vanessa Bennett moved through the surgical wing of Johns Hopkins with her customary precision. As chief of cardiothoracic surgery, her days were filled with life-and-death decisions, complex procedures, and mentoring the next generation of surgeons. Today, however, was special. She was conducting a master class on her innovative valve replacement technique with observers from 12 countries present. The technique, which significantly reduced recovery time and improved outcomes for patients with certain heart conditions, had recently earned her the prestigious Carlton Award in Surgical Innovation. As she completed the demonstration, guiding a resident through the final sutures, applause broke out in the observation area. Vanessa acknowledged it with a modest nod, then focused on closing the patient properly. Later, as she removed her surgical gown in the attending's lounge, her colleague, Dr. James Wilson, approached. "Brilliant work today, Vanessa. As always." "Thank you, James. I was in London last week for the European Cardiac Society meeting," he continued. "Your name came up repeatedly, not just for your surgical innovations." Vanessa raised an eyebrow questioningly. "The Meridian incident," James clarified. "It has become something of a rallying point for discussions about discrimination in professional spaces. Several colleagues shared similar experiences with airlines and hospitals." Vanessa sighed. "That was not my intention. We just wanted equal treatment on our anniversary trip. Sometimes the most important changes come from people who were not looking to create them," James observed. "By the way, I flew Meridian on the way back. The difference in service culture was noticeable. The flight attendant actually addressed me as Dr. Wilson without assuming I was traveling with a white physician." Vanessa smiled. "Small victories." "Not so small," James countered. "Institutional change rarely happens without a catalyst. You and Michael provided that." In Washington, D.C., Michael Bennett settled into his new office at FAA headquarters. The promotion to Deputy Director for Regulatory Compliance had come through 3 months earlier, accelerated by his handling of the Meridian incident and the subsequent industry-wide service review he had helped initiate. His new position gave him oversight of enforcement actions across multiple divisions, including the Office of Civil Rights. On his desk sat a framed photo from his wedding day 20 years earlier. Vanessa, in her elegant gown, looking at him with the same confident brilliance that had captured his heart at Howard University. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Rachel Torres entered carrying a tablet. "The quarterly compliance reports are in," she announced. "You will want to see this." Michael gestured for her to continue. "Passenger complaints alleging discriminatory treatment are down 62% industry-wide since the implementation of the new service standards. Meridian specifically shows an 89% reduction." "Impressive," Michael acknowledged. "And the anonymous testing program." "Even better," Torres replied. "Our undercover evaluators found statistically insignificant differences in service quality across demographic groups on 94% of monitored flights. 6 months ago, that figure was below 40%. Michael nodded, satisfied but cautious. "It is a strong start. Let us see if it holds when the spotlight fades." "There is more," Torres continued. "The training program developed for Meridian has been voluntarily adopted by 6 other major carriers. It is becoming the de facto industry standard. That is the real victory," Michael observed, "when change spreads beyond the original scope of enforcement." After Torres departed, Michael opened his email to find a message from Meridian's new Chief Diversity Officer, Amara Jackson, the same representative who had met them at Heathrow 6 months earlier. Attached was Meridian's first quarterly inclusion report, showing detailed metrics on service quality hiring practices and passenger satisfaction across demographic categories. The message read, Inspector Bennett. While no corporation welcomes a regulatory action, I want to personally thank you for forcing Meridian to confront our failings. What began as a crisis has evolved into a genuine transformation. Our internal surveys show that 78% of our staff believe these changes have improved our workplace culture and service quality. The incident on Flight 735 was a painful but necessary wake-up call. If you and Dr. Bennett ever choose to fly with us again, I hope you will find an airline that has learned its lesson. Respectfully, Amara Jackson, Chief Diversity Officer, Meridian Airways. Michael forwarded the message to Vanessa with a simple note. Progress. For James Whitfield, the first-class passenger who had sided with Victoria during the incident, the personal consequences were unexpected. His dismissive comments had been captured in Alexandra Williams's viral account of the flight, leading to his identification by social media users. As a senior partner at an investment firm whose client base included numerous professional athletes and entertainment figures, the reputational damage was swift. Several high-profile clients withdrew their accounts, citing his behavior on Flight 735 as evidence of attitudes they could not support in their financial advisor. Whitfield was quietly asked to take early retirement, his partnership bought out at a reduced valuation. His firm issued a statement distancing itself from his comments and announcing a comprehensive review of its diversity practices. For Luis Morales, standing up for what was right had led to positive change. After providing testimony for the FAA investigation, he had resigned from Meridian, unwilling to remain in an environment where discrimination had been tacitly accepted. Delta Airlines had quickly hired him, impressed by his integrity during the incident. Now, as a senior flight attendant, he frequently used his experience as a teaching moment for new crew members. Always remember that you never know who your passengers are, not just their status or authority, but their humanity. Treat everyone with equal dignity, not because they might be important, but because it is right. Alexandra Williams, the travel blogger whose documentation had proven crucial to the investigation, had gained significant professional recognition. Her detailed coverage of the incident and subsequent industry changes had earned her a regular column in Travel and Leisure magazine focused on equity in travel experiences. For the Hoffmans, the older white couple who had received preferential treatment on Flight 735, the incident had been enlightening. Richard Hoffman had written a thoughtful LinkedIn post about witnessing discrimination from the privileged side. As a white man who has flown first class for decades, I never questioned why I received certain treatment. The Meridian incident forced me to recognize that what I perceived as normal service was actually preferential treatment denied to others based on appearance. This recognition has changed how I view many interactions in my professional and personal life. 6 months after their interrupted anniversary trip, Michael and Vanessa Bennett finally completed the celebration they had originally planned. They returned to London, staying at the same hotel in Mayfair, attending performances at the Royal Opera House and dining at the restaurants they had discovered during their extended previous stay. This time they flew United Airlines, where the service was impeccably equal for all first-class passengers. When the flight attendant discovered they were celebrating their anniversary, she arranged for the entire cabin to toast them, a gesture of genuine warmth that highlighted how service could be both premium and equitable. On their final evening in London, they strolled along the Thames embankment, the city lights reflecting on the water. Vanessa linked her arm through Michael's, leaning against his shoulder. "You know, despite everything that happened, I am glad we took that Meridian flight," she said thoughtfully. "Really, even with all the drama." "Even with that," she confirmed. "For 20 years I have been fighting these battles in medical settings, being mistaken for the nurse, having patients request the real doctor, watching less qualified white colleagues advance faster. You have faced similar challenges at the FAA. We have both learned to pick our battles carefully." "True," Michael agreed. "We cannot fight every slight, But sometimes, Vanessa continued, you have to stand firm. What happened on that flight was not just about us. It was about every passenger who did not have an FAA badge to protect them, every person who accepted discriminatory treatment because they lacked the power to challenge it. Michael nodded, understanding completely. One flight, one moment of accountability led to industry-wide change. Exactly. Vanessa smiled. Our anniversary became something more meaningful than we planned, and honestly, I would not change that. As they continued their walk, they remained unaware of just how far-reaching the consequences had become. The Meridian standards, as the new service protocols were now known across the industry, were being adopted by hotels, restaurants, and other premium service providers. What had begun as one couple's stand for dignity had evolved into a movement for equitable treatment that transcended the airline industry. For Victoria Newman, the personal consequences were profound. A 22-year career ended in disgrace. But for Michael and Vanessa Bennett, what might have been simply a ruined anniversary had instead become a catalyst for meaningful change. Their professional expertise and personal dignity, combined with the authority represented by Michael's badge, had transformed an individual incident of discrimination into a moment of industry-wide accountability. 1 year to the day after the incident on Meridian Airways Flight 735, Michael and Vanessa Bennett boarded another first-class flight. This time they were traveling to Stockholm, where Vanessa had been invited to deliver a keynote address at the International Cardiac Innovation Summit. The differences in their experience were immediately apparent. The gate agent welcomed them warmly with no questioning glances at their premium boarding passes. The cabin crew greeted all first-class passengers with identical courtesy, regardless of appearance. The service throughout the flight was impeccably equal. The same menu options offered to everyone, the same wine presentation, the same attentive care. What the Bennetts did not realize was that their names had been recognized during check-in. As they settled into their suites, the lead flight attendant discreetly informed the crew, "The Bennetts from the Meridian incident are in 2A and 2B. Make sure our service is exemplary, not because they are VIPs, but because they represent what equal treatment should look like for everyone." When they landed in Stockholm, Vanessa checked her phone to find an email from a former medical school classmate. "Just flew first class for the first time, big promotion, and kept thinking of you." The flight attendant actually addressed me as Dr. Johnson without assuming I was traveling with a white colleague. I know that should not be remarkable in 2023, but we both know it is. Thank you for standing up that day. It has made a difference for all of us. Vanessa showed the message to Michael as they waited for their luggage. That makes it all worthwhile, she said softly. Michael nodded. One moment of accountability creating ripples of change. In the years since the incident, both of their professional lives had evolved in unexpected ways. Vanessa's groundbreaking surgical technique had gained international recognition, leading to her appointment to the World Health Organization's Surgical Innovation Advisory Board. Her profile as both a medical pioneer and an advocate for equity in professional spaces had elevated her influence beyond medicine. She had published a widely read article in the New England Journal of Medicine titled "The Paper Cuts That Bleed Microaggressions in Professional Environments," using her experience on Flight 735 as a starting point for exploring how subtle discriminatory behaviors affect performance and advancement in high-stakes fields. Michael's promotion to Deputy Director for Regulatory Compliance at the FAA had expanded his influence throughout the aviation industry. The comprehensive review of service standards he had initiated had identified patterns of discriminatory practices across multiple carriers, resulting in industry-wide reforms. More significantly, the Bennett Protocol had been established as an FAA best practice, a standardized approach to investigating allegations of discriminatory treatment in air transportation. The protocol emphasized objective documentation, statistical analysis, and passenger testimony, creating a more rigorous framework for addressing complaints that had previously been dismissed as subjective or anecdotal. Their personal triumph, however, extended beyond professional advancement. They had transformed what could have been simply a humiliating experience into a catalyst for meaningful change. The legacy of Flight 735 lived on in ways they were still discovering. In Stockholm, Vanessa's keynote address focused on innovation in cardiac surgery, but included a powerful section on breaking barriers in elite professional spaces. As surgeons, we understand that sometimes the most important intervention is not the one we planned. Sometimes we must address an unexpected finding that, left untreated, threatens the entire procedure. The same principle applies to discrimination in professional environments. When we encounter it, whether in an operating room, a boardroom, or a first-class cabin, we have a responsibility to address it decisively, not just for ourselves, but for everyone who will come after us. The standing ovation that followed reflected not just respect for her surgical innovations, but recognition of the broader impact of her advocacy. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the airline industry continued to adapt to the post-Meridian landscape. The quarterly compliance reports showed sustained improvement in service equity, with discriminatory complaints remaining significantly below pre-incident levels. Meridian Airways, after its initial corporate meltdown, had emerged as an unexpected leader in inclusive service standards. Under the leadership of Amara Jackson, the airline's new Chief Diversity Officer, Meridian, had transformed its training policies and corporate culture. Their Equal Premium Experience initiative had won industry awards and, more importantly, rebuilt passenger trust across demographic groups. Luis Morales, now a senior trainer at Delta Airlines, had developed a training module titled The Power of Equal Service, which had been adopted by multiple carriers. The module used the Meridian incident as a case study in how discriminatory service could lead to devastating consequences for both individuals and organizations. Victoria Newman's story had become a cautionary tale in the industry. After her dismissal from Meridian and the permanent revocation of her flight attendant certification, she had struggled to rebuild her life. The Hudson News job had lasted only 3 months before customer recognition and ongoing hostility had forced her to resign. Eventually, Victoria had moved from Atlanta to Phoenix, seeking anonymity in a city where her face was less recognized. She found work at a call center, her experience in customer service providing at least some transferable skills. The irony was not lost on her. She now served customers without being able to see their race, forced to provide equal treatment by the very nature of the medium. James Whitfield, the passenger who had supported Victoria's discrimination, had experienced his own reckoning. After being forced into early retirement, he had undertaken what he described in a LinkedIn post as a personal journey of uncomfortable self-examination. He now volunteered with a professional mentoring program for minority business students, an effort to redress the damage his previous attitudes had caused. Alexandra Williams, the travel blogger whose documentation had proven crucial to the investigation, had parlayed her coverage of the incident into a successful book class in the cabin Race, Privilege, and Power in Premium Travel. The book examined how luxury travel spaces often reinforced social hierarchies through subtle service disparities and unwritten rules. For the aviation industry as a whole, the legacy of Flight 735 was profound. The FAA's expanded review had resulted in new regulatory guidance on non-discriminatory service, making equal treatment a safety compliance issue rather than merely a customer service concern. Airlines now faced potential certification consequences for persistent patterns of discrimination, not just public relations challenges. The most significant change, however, was cultural. Flight attendants across carriers reported a shift in how service equality was prioritized and measured. Anonymous testing programs regularly evaluated treatment across passenger demographics, with results tied to performance reviews and compensation. As Michael and Vanessa settled into their hotel in Stockholm, they reflected on this unexpected legacy. What had begun as a simple anniversary trip had evolved into a watershed moment for equity in premium travel. "We never set out to be activists," Vanessa observed, gazing out at the Swedish capital's waterfront. We just wanted the champagne we paid for." Michael laughed. Sometimes the most powerful statements are the ones we make simply by insisting on being treated with dignity. "Do you think it will last?" Vanessa asked. "The changes, I mean." Michael considered the question. "Some will. The regulatory requirements ensure that. But the deeper cultural shift, that depends on whether people genuinely understand why it matters, not just that they have to comply. Like medicine," Vanessa noted. "You can mandate hand-washing protocols, but real change happens when doctors internalize why it is essential, not just follow rules to avoid penalties." "Exactly," Michael agreed. "But I am optimistic. The conversations happening now are different than they were a year ago. People who never had to think about these issues are thinking about them. That is where real change begins." As they prepared for dinner at one of Stockholm's finest restaurants, Vanessa received a text from a colleague at Johns Hopkins. "Just saw a segment on CNN about the 1-year anniversary of the Meridian moment, as they are calling it. Your quiet dignity in the face of discrimination has become a case study in effective response. Proud to call you a colleague and friend." Attached was a link to a CNN special report titled "The Badge Moment 1 Year Later." The segment explored how a single incident of discrimination had catalyzed industry-wide reform, featuring interviews with airline executives, regulatory experts, and passengers who had experienced similar treatment. Michael and Vanessa decided to watch it later, not wanting to revisit the incident during their evening out. This trip was about celebrating Vanessa's keynote address, not reliving past injustices. As they dined that evening on exquisite Scandinavian cuisine, they remained focused on the present and future, not the incident that had unexpectedly defined the past year. The triumph was not in the publicity or recognition, but in the knowledge that they had stood firm for a principle that extended far beyond their personal comfort. Their legacy was not just the regulatory changes or corporate reforms, but the countless invisible moments of equal treatment that passengers would now experience, the dignified service that would become so normal that its absence rather than its presence would be remarkable. For Michael and Vanessa Bennett, that was the true personal triumph. Not that they had brought an airline to its knees, but that they had helped create a world where the next couple who did not look like they belonged in first class would never have to prove that they did. 3 years after Meridian Airways Flight 735, Michael Bennett stood before a packed auditorium at the Global Aviation Summit in Singapore. As the newly appointed director of the FAA's Office of Equal Access and Compliance, he had been invited to deliver the conference's closing address. The audience represented every facet of the aviation industry: airline executives, safety officials, industry analysts, and regulatory experts from around the world. They had gathered to discuss the future of air travel, but Michael's presentation focused on something more fundamental: dignity in transportation. 3 years ago, he began his voice steady and measured. "My wife and I boarded a flight to celebrate our 20th anniversary. We had purchased first-class tickets 11 months in advance. We were professional courteous and expected nothing more than the service promised when we paid for those seats." The room was silent, most attendees familiar with the now famous incident. What followed was a methodical attempt to erase us from a space where someone decided we did not belong. Not because of our behavior, but because of assumptions made about who deserves premium service and who does not. Michael paused, surveying the room. I could have shown my FAA credentials immediately. I could have identified myself from the start. But that would have missed the point entirely. No passenger should need federal authority to be treated with basic dignity. He advanced to the next slide, displaying a graph of discrimination complaints across major carriers before and after the implementation of the industry-wide reforms. The changes we have witnessed over the past 3 years are encouraging. Formal complaints alleging discriminatory treatment have declined by 76% industry-wide. Anonymous testing shows statistically negligible differences in service quality across passenger demographics. He clicked to another slide showing training hours dedicated to service equity across carriers. What was once an afterthought, a 20-minute video in new hire orientation, has become a core component of aviation training. Flight attendants now spend as much time learning about equitable service as they do learning about wine pairings and meal presentation. The statistics told a compelling story of industry transformation, but Michael knew numbers alone could not capture the human impact. These improvements matter not just because they comply with regulations, but because they restore dignity to the travel experience for millions of passengers who previously accepted subtle discrimination as an inevitable cost of mobility. He shared anonymous testimonials from passengers who had experienced the industry before and after the reforms. A black executive who no longer had to wear company logo clothing to be treated appropriately in premium cabins. An Indian-American physician who was now addressed as doctor. Without clarification, a Middle Eastern family who no longer faced random secondary screenings on every journey. The true measure of our progress is not found in compliance reports or corporate statements, Michael continued. It is found in these everyday experiences where passengers can focus on their journey rather than defending their right to be in certain spaces. As he neared the conclusion of his address, Michael shifted from statistics to personal reflection. When I showed my FAA badge on that flight 3 years ago, I was not just identifying myself as a federal inspector. I was demonstrating a fundamental truth that extends beyond aviation knowledge is power and dignity is non-negotiable. That moment, what some have called the badge moment, has been characterized as an exercise of authority. But its true significance lay in exposing the consequences of assumptions. The flight attendant who decided my wife and I did not belong in first class never considered that I might have regulatory authority over her industry. She saw our skin color and made judgments that ultimately cost her career and transformed her airline. Michael's expression remained thoughtful rather than triumphant. The lesson is not that discriminating against the wrong person carries consequences. The lesson is that there is no right person to discriminate against. Every passenger deserves equal treatment regardless of appearance, accent, or attire. He advanced to his final slide, a simple photograph of a first-class cabin where passengers of diverse backgrounds were receiving identical service their humanity acknowledged equally regardless of appearance. "This is our destination," Michael said simply. A transportation system where dignity is not determined by demographics, where service standards apply equally to everyone who purchases a ticket, where belonging is not questioned based on appearance. The journey to this destination is not complete. Old habits and unconscious biases do not disappear overnight. But 3 years after that flight, I can stand before you and report meaningful progress. Not because regulations demanded it, but because enough people throughout the industry recognized that equal treatment is not just legally required, it is morally necessary. As Michael concluded his address, the audience rose in unanimous applause, not just acknowledging his presentation, but recognizing the industry's collective journey toward greater equity. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been made to feel like you didn't belong somewhere you had every right to be, I want to hear from you. Share your experience in the comments below. The power of standing up with dignity against discrimination extends far beyond one flight or one industry. It's about creating a world where everyone is treated with the respect they deserve, regardless of appearance. Please hit that like button to help spread this message. Subscribe to our channel for more stories of transformation and justice, and share this video with someone who needs to hear that they're not alone in their experiences. Because when we speak up together, real change happens.